Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Nightmare Narratives. I can picture some of you already in bed, maybe some of you just getting home from work. Wherever you are, whatever time it is, I'm glad you're here. If this helps you relax or sleep, please like and subscribe. It means a lot. Now let's get you comfortable, and I'll tell you tonight's story. My name is Catherine Whitman, but everyone calls me Kate. I've been a ranger with the Cherokee National Forest for 13 years now, and I thought I'd seen everything these mountains could throw at me. Bears, illegal hunters, lost hikers, drug runners, you name it. But nothing prepared me for what happened on Roan Mountain in April of 1983. I should tell you something about myself first. Before I became a ranger, I had a PhD in anthropology. I specialized in Appalachian folklore, especially Cherokee culture. My grandmother was half Cherokee, though she never talked much about it. Growing up, I always felt drawn to these mountains, like they were calling me home. The call came in on a Tuesday morning. Park Superintendent Jim Morrison sounded worried on the radio. "Kate, we got a problem up on Roan Mountain. Someone's been digging around the old burial sites." My stomach dropped. The Cherokee burial mounds on Roan Mountain were sacred ground. They'd been there for over 1,000 years, and we were supposed to protect them. "How bad is it?" I asked. "Bad. Real bad. Can you get up there today?" I looked outside my cabin. The weather was perfect. Clear skies, warm spring air. "I'll head up right now. Be careful, Kate, and take the radio. Weather Service is calling for possible storms later." That should have been my first warning. In 13 years, I'd never seen the weather change as fast as it did that day. The drive up Roan Mountain takes about 2 hours from my station. The road winds through thick forest until you reach the balds, those strange, treeless areas near the top where nothing grows but grass and wildflowers. Cherokee legend says the balds were created by their ancestors as places to watch for enemies. The open meadows give you a view for miles in every direction. I parked my truck at the old trailhead and hiked the last mile to the burial sites. The Cherokee mounds sat in a small valley between two ridges, hidden from casual hikers. Most people didn't even know they were there, but someone knew. Someone had been very busy. The first mound I saw made me sick. It had been torn open like a wound. Dirt was scattered everywhere. Broken pottery lay in pieces on the ground, and bones, old brown bones, were scattered around like trash. I knelt down and picked up a piece of pottery. It was beautiful work, with intricate designs that told stories. Now it was broken, worthless to anyone except the people who made it centuries ago. "Damn grave robbers," I whispered. I spent the next hour documenting everything with my camera. 3 mounds had been dug up. Artifacts were missing. Probably anything that looked valuable to ignorant thieves. But worse than the theft was the disrespect. Sacred objects had been thrown aside and broken. Human remains were scattered like garbage. As I worked, I noticed the air getting colder. When I looked up, dark clouds were rolling in from the west, moving faster than any storm I'd ever seen. The temperature dropped 20 degrees in 10 minutes. That's when I heard it for the first time. A rattling sound, like bones clicking together in the wind. But there was no wind. I looked around trying to find the source of the sound. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. The hair on my arm stood up, and not from the cold. I grabbed my radio. "Base, this is Kate. The burial sites have been hit hard. I'm going to need a crime scene team up here." Static answered me. I tried again. Nothing but white noise. The rattling got louder. I've always been a practical person. I don't believe in ghosts or spirits or any of that nonsense. I'm a scientist. But standing there in that sacred place, surrounded by scattered bones and broken dreams, I felt something watching me. The first snowflakes started, falling as I packed up my camera. In April. At lower elevation, dogwood trees were blooming. Up here, winter was coming back. I should have left then. I should have hiked back to my truck and called for backup from town. But something made me stay. Maybe it was my Cherokee blood. Maybe it was 13 years of protecting these mountains. Or maybe it was the way those bones seemed to be waiting for something. As darkness fell and the snow got heavier, I set up camp in my truck. I'd stay overnight and hike back to the burial sites at first light. I wanted to see if I could find any clues about who did this. That night, I dreamed of warriors in traditional Cherokee dress, standing guard over their ancestors' graves. In my dream, they were angry. Very angry. I woke up to the sound of rattling bones and realized it wasn't a dream at all. Morning came gray and cold. 6 inches of snow covered everything, which was impossible for late April. I checked my radio again, still nothing but static. My truck's engine turned over, but barely. The temperature gauge read 15 degrees. I put on my warmest gear and hiked back to the burial sites. In the snow, I could see fresh tracks, boot prints leading to and from the mounds. The grave robbers had come back during the night, but there were other tracks too. Strange ones that made no sense. They looked almost human, but wrong somehow. The stride was too long, and there were only 4 toes on each foot, and they were bare footprints in 15-degree weather. The rattling sound was constant now, coming from all directions. Every time I tried to focus on where it was coming from, it seemed to move. At the first mound, I found something that made my blood run cold. The scattered bones from yesterday had been gathered up and arranged in patterns, not random patterns. Specific designs that I recognized from my anthropology studies. Cherokee symbols for protection and warning. Someone, or something, had spent the night arranging human bones into sacred symbols. I took pictures, but my camera was acting up. Half the shot came out blurry, and the other half showed strange shadows that I didn't see with my naked eye. That's when I found the first body. He was young, maybe 25, wearing expensive hiking boots and carrying a metal detector. His face was frozen in a scream, but there wasn't a mark on him. He was just dead, lying in the snow next to the largest burial mound. I checked for a pulse, knowing I wouldn't find one. His skin was ice cold, and his eyes were wide open, staring at something terrible. But the strangest thing was what he was holding, an ancient Cherokee tomahawk, still covered in dirt from the mound. "Base, this is Ranger Whitman." I tried the radio again. "I have a body at the burial sites. I need immediate backup and a medical examiner." Still nothing but static. I was on my own. I searched the dead man's pockets and found a wallet. Thomas Bradley from Atlanta. In his backpack, I found digging tools and plastic bags full of artifacts, pottery pieces, arrowheads, and what looked like parts of ceremonial masks. The rattling got louder as I went through his stuff, like whatever was making the sound was getting angry. I put everything back and stood up. That's when I saw them. At first, I thought they were just shadows between the trees. But shadows don't move against the light, and they don't carry weapons. There were at least 6 of them, maybe more. Tall figures in traditional Cherokee dress, standing at the edge of the clearing. They didn't make any sound except for that constant rattling. I blinked, and they were gone. "Hello?" I called out. "I'm Kate Whitman, Cherokee National Forest Service. I'm here to help protect this place." No answer. Just the wind and that damn rattling. I decided to examine the other mounds. Maybe I could figure out exactly what had been taken. At the second mound, I found another set of tracks. Boot prints leading away into the Soul forest. The grave robbers might still be out there. Following the tracks was easy in the snow. They led uphill toward an old hunting cabin I knew about. The cabin was on park land, but hunters sometimes used it illegally during deer season. The tracks led right to the cabin door. I approached carefully, my hand on the pepper spray attached to my belt. The windows were covered from the inside, but I could see light leaking around the edges. "Park Service," I called out. "I need to speak with whoever's inside." I heard voices, at least 2 men, maybe 3. They were arguing about something. "We need to get out of here," one voice said. "This place ain't right." "Not without the rest of it," another voice answered. "You see how much that collector paid for just one piece? There's a fortune buried up here." "I don't care about the money anymore. Did you see what happened to Tommy?" "Tommy slipped and hit his head, that's all. He was screaming about skeleton warriors when we found him. And look at this weather. It was 70 degrees yesterday." I knocked on the door. Gentlemen, I'm Ranger Whitman. I need to speak with you about the burial sites. The voices stopped. After a moment, I heard footsteps approaching the door. We ain't done nothing wrong, a voice called out. I just need to ask some questions. A man is dead down at the mounds. The door opened a crack, and I saw part of a face, unshaven, scared-looking. Dead? What do you mean dead? Thomas Bradley. I found his body this morning. Did you know him? The door opened wider, and two men stepped out. They were both in their 30s, dressed in hunting gear. One carried a shovel, the other had a backpack that clinked when he moved. Tommy's dead? The first man asked. His name was Ray, according to the hunting license clipped to his jacket. I found him at the burial mound. What happened up here last night? Ray and his partner, whose name was Eddie, looked at each other nervously. We were digging, Eddie said. Just looking for arrowheads and stuff. Nothing wrong with that. Actually, there's a lot wrong with that. This is protected land, and those are sacred burial sites. What you're doing is federal crime. Look, lady, Ray said, we got bigger problems than federal crimes. Something ain't right about this place. Soon as the sun went down last night, things got weird. Weird how? Sounds, Eddie said, like bones shaking in a bag, and shapes moving around the mounds. And the cold. Jesus, where'd this cold come from? Tommy went back down there around midnight, Ray continued. Said he dropped his metal detector. We heard him screaming about 20 minutes later. When we went looking for him, we found him just like you said, dead as a stone, holding that old tomahawk. The rattling sound got louder, and all three of us looked toward the burial sites. There it is again, Eddie whispered. Been going on all night. That's when I saw them clearly for the first time. The figures at the edge of the clearing weren't shadows or tricks of the light. They were warriors, Cherokee warriors in traditional dress, but wrong somehow. Too thin, too pale, and when they moved, they made that rattling sound, because they weren't flesh and blood anymore. They were bones, held together by something stronger than sinew. Oh, God, Ray whispered. Do you see them too? I saw them. 7 skeletal figures in war paint and feathers carrying ancient weapons. They stood perfectly still, watching us. We need to leave, I said quietly. Right now. But it was too late. The bone warriors were already moving, surrounding the cabin. And they looked very, very angry. The skeletal warriors moved without sound except for that constant rattling. It was their bones clicking together as they walked, like wind chimes made of death. Don't run, I whispered to Ray and Eddie. Movement might trigger them. But Eddie was already panicking. He dropped his backpack and bolted toward the trees. He made it maybe 20 yards before one of the warriors cut him off. The thing moved faster than anything I'd ever seen. 1 second it was standing still, the next it was in front of Eddie, raising what looked like a stone war club. Eddie screamed and tried to change direction. The club came down with a wet thud. Eddie dropped to the ground and didn't get up. Jesus Christ, Ray shouted. He grabbed the shotgun, leaning against the cabin wall, and fired at the nearest warrior. The buckshot passed right through the skeletal figure like it was made of mist. But the warrior didn't like being shot at. It turned toward Ray, and I saw its face clearly for the first time. It had been human once, a long time ago. Now it was just a skull with glowing points of light where the eyes should be. War paint was somehow still visible on the bone, red and black stripes that seemed to move in the dim light. Ray fired again, with the same result. The warrior glided toward him, raising an ancient tomahawk. I did the only thing I could think of. I stepped between them. Wait! I shouted in Cherokee. My grandmother had taught me a few words when I was little, and I'd learned more during my graduate studies. I am Cherokee. Part Cherokee. The warrior stopped. All of them stopped. The rattling died away to nothing. The lead warrior, taller than the others and wearing what looked like a chief's headdress, stepped closer to me. It leaned down until its skull was inches from my face. I could smell old earth and decaying leaves. It spoke in Cherokee, too fast and too old for me to understand completely. But I caught some words. Desecration. Sacred. Punishment. I understand, I said in English, then tried Cherokee. I know this place is sacred. I'm here to protect it. The chief warrior straightened up and looked at Ray, who was still holding his useless shotgun. The sacred bones have been scattered, it said in perfect English. The ancestors have been disturbed. This cannot go unpunished. Look, I said. These men made a mistake. They didn't understand. Let me take them away from here, and I promise I'll make sure the burial sites are protected. They stole from the dead. They broke sacred objects for profit. The old ways demand justice. Ray was whimpering behind me. I could smell that he'd wet himself. What kind of justice? I asked. The chief warrior pointed at Eddie's body. The same justice given to the other thief. There has to be another way. I'm part Cherokee. My grandmother was half Cherokee. Doesn't that give me any standing here? The warrior considered this. The others remained perfectly still, waiting. You may speak for your ancestors, it finally said. But first, you must prove you understand the old ways. How? The sacred objects must be returned to their proper places. The bones of the ancestors must be reburied with honor, and the thieves must make amends for their crimes. I looked back at Ray, who was shaking so hard he could barely stand. What kind of amends? That is for you to decide, daughter of the Cherokee. But choose quickly. The storm grows stronger, and our patience grows thin. As if to prove the point, the wind picked up and snow started falling harder. The temperature was dropping fast, and I could see more skeletal warriors emerging from the forest. They surrounded us completely now, maybe 20 of them. Ray, I said quietly, put down the gun and get Eddie's backpack. We need to return everything they stole. Eddie's dead, Ray whispered. I know, but we need to save ourselves if we can. Now move slowly and get that backpack. Ray set down his shotgun and walked toward Eddie's body on shaking legs. The warriors watched him, but didn't interfere. He picked up the backpack full of stolen artifacts and carried it back to me. What's in your backpack? I asked. More of the same. Pottery pieces, arrowheads, some kind of carved bone thing. We're going to carry all of it back to the burial mounds and put everything back where it belongs. Then we're going to rebury the bones that were scattered. And then, I looked at the chief warrior. Then we hope they let us leave. The march back to the burial sites was the longest walk of my life. The skeletal warriors formed a circle around us, moving silently through the snow. Every step I took, I expected to feel a stone blade between my shoulder blades. But they let us walk. They let us carry our burden of stolen sacred objects back to where they belonged. At the first mound, I opened Ray's backpack and started removing artifacts. Pottery pieces, stone tools, carved bones, shell beads, all the treasures that people had been buried with over 1,000 years ago. Help me, I told Ray. We need to put everything back in the mounds and cover them up. Ray was still shaking, but he started helping. We worked as the snow fell and the skeletal warriors watched. I tried to place each artifact respectfully, the way I thought it should be placed. The hardest part was dealing with the human remains. Bones that had been scattered by the grave robbers were lying all over the clearing. I gathered them up carefully, treating each one like it belonged to someone's ancestor, because that's exactly what they were. As we worked, the chief warrior spoke to me in Cherokee. I caught some of it, words about respect, honor, and the proper treatment of the dead. I'm trying, I said. I want to do this right. You show respect, the warrior replied. That is good, but one thief remains unpunished. I looked at Ray, who had heard. His face went white. He's helping me fix this, I said. He's trying to make amends. The old ways demand a life for a life. 2 thieves have died. 1 remains. What if he promises never to disturb sacred places again? What if he helps protect them? The chief warrior was quiet for a long moment. Around us, the other warriors stood perfectly still, like a bone forest in the snow. There is another way, the chief finally said, but it requires sacrifice. What kind of sack? Riffage? The living must take the place of the guardian. Someone must stay to protect this place when we return to our rest. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold. You mean stay here permanently? Until death, the sacred places need living guardians as well as spirit guardians. Ray was shaking his head frantically. No way. No way in hell. But I was thinking. I'd spent 13 years protecting these mountains. I'd studied Cherokee culture. I felt a connection to this place that went deeper than just doing my job. If I stayed, I said, would that be enough? Would Ray be free to go? The chief warrior tilted his skull, considering. You would become the guardian of all sacred places in these mountains. You would watch over them until your death, and then your spirit would join ours in protecting them forever. Ray grabbed my arm. You can't be serious. They're asking you to give up your whole life. But was I giving it up? Or was I finally finding what I was meant to do? Before I could answer, we heard voices calling from the forest. Human voices. Kate! Kate! Where are you? It was Jim Morrison, my supervisor, and he wasn't alone. I could hear at least 3 other men with him. The skeletal warriors heard them too. They turned toward the sound, raising their weapons. Wait, I said. Those are my people. They're coming to help. More thieves? The chief warrior asked. No, Park Service. We protect these places too. The warrior considered this, but I could tell he was losing patience. The storm was getting worse, and I could feel something changing in the air around us. The spirits were getting stronger as the night got darker. Choose now, daughter of the Cherokee. Will you take the guardian oath, or will we dispense justice in the old way? I looked at Ray, then at the approaching lights of my rescue party, then at the ancient burial mounds that had been desecrated by greed. I'll take the oath, I said. Kate, no, Ray shouted. But the chief warrior was already moving toward me, reaching out with one bony hand. The last thing I remembered was touching that ancient hand and feeling a cold that went deeper than winter, deeper than death. When I woke up, everything had changed. I woke up lying in the snow, but I wasn't cold anymore. Jim Morrison was kneeling beside me, checking my pulse. Kate, thank God. We've been looking for you all night. I sat up slowly, trying to remember where I was. The burial mounds. The skeletal warriors. Ray. Where's Ray? I asked. Who's Ray? Jim looked confused. Kate, we found you alone up here. You were unconscious in the snow. Been out here all night from the looks of it. I looked around. The mounds were covered with fresh snow, but I could see they'd been filled in. Someone had done a good job repairing the damage. All the scattered artifacts and bones were gone. There were 2 men, I said. Grave robbers. They were digging up the burial sites. We found evidence of digging, Jim said. And we found one body, a young man named Thomas Bradley, but no one else. Ray and Eddie. They were here. I talked to them. Jim looked at me with concern. Kate, you've been out in sub-zero weather all night. You might be a little confused. Hypothermia can cause hallucinations. But I knew what I'd seen. I looked at the spot where the chief warrior had been standing. There was nothing there now except snow and shadows. Help me up, I said. Jim and his team got me to my feet. I was surprisingly steady, considering I'd supposedly been unconscious in the snow for hours. We need to get you to a hospital, Jim said. You could have frostbite, or worse. I'm fine. And strangely, I was. I felt better than I had in years. Stronger. More aware of everything around me. Kate, you were nearly frozen solid when we found you. You should be dead. But I wasn't dead. I was something else now. Something more. As we walked back toward the trucks, I heard it one more time. The soft, the rattling of bones in the wind. But when I looked back, there was nothing there. Did you hear that? I asked Jim. Hear what? Nothing. Never mind. We were almost back to the trucks when I saw him. Ray was sitting in the back of a Park Service vehicle, wrapped in blankets and talking to a ranger I didn't recognize. He was alive. Ray, I called out. He looked up and saw me. For a second, his face showed pure terror. Then recognition, then relief. Kate, you're okay. I thought they got you too, Jim looked back and forth between us. You know this man? He was one of the grave robbers, I said, along with Eddie Martinez and Thomas Bradley. We found this gentleman wandering on the mountain road around dawn, the other ranger said, half frozen and talking about skeleton warriors. We figured he was suffering from exposure. Ray looked at me with desperate eyes. You saw them too, right? Tell them you saw them too. I looked at Ray, then at Jim, then back at the burial mounds. I saw evidence that someone had been digging up the sacred sites, I said carefully. And I found one body. Mr. I looked at Ray. I'm sorry. I don't think you ever told me your last name. Ray stared at me in confusion. Ray Kowalski. You know who I am. We talked for hours. You saved my life. I think you've been through a traumatic experience, Mr. Kowalski. Finding your friend's body like that, it can play tricks on your mind. But the warriors, the bone warriors. There are no warriors, Jim said firmly. Just old burial sites and some very cold weather. We're going to get you both to a hospital and checked out. Ray looked at me one more time, and I saw the understanding in his eyes. I wasn't going to back up his story. As far as the official record was concerned, the bone rattlers of Roan Mountain didn't exist. But Ray knew the truth, and more importantly, he understood the message. The sacred places were protected now. They had guardians watching over them, and if anyone else tried to disturb them, they wouldn't be as lucky as Ray Kowalski. During the ride down the mountain, Jim filled me in on what his team had found. The burial sites were definitely disturbed, he said. Professional job, unfortunately. Whoever did it knew what they were looking for. But here's the strange thing. Everything was put back. Someone filled in all the holes and tried to repair the damage. Maybe they had second thoughts, I suggested. Maybe. We found some artifacts scattered around, but most of them looked like they'd been returned to where they belonged. Almost like someone was trying to undo what they'd done. I nodded. People sometimes realize they've made a mistake. The Bradley kid had a backpack full of artifacts, pottery pieces, arrowheads, some carved bones, all from the burial sites. But Kowalski didn't have anything on him when we found him. Maybe his friend was the leader. Maybe Kowalski was just along for the ride. That's what we're thinking. Bradley's from Atlanta, part of a group that's been hitting archaeological sites all over the southeast. We've been trying to catch them for months. At the hospital, doctors checked me over and declared me remarkably healthy for someone who'd spent a night in sub-zero weather. No frostbite, no hypothermia, no ill effects at all. You're very lucky, Ms. Whitman, the doctor said. Most people wouldn't survive what you went through. But I knew it wasn't luck. It was something else, something that had changed me during those dark hours on Roan Mountain. Ray was in the next room, being treated for mild hypothermia and exhaustion. Before I left the hospital, I stopped by to see him. He was alone, staring out the window. How are you feeling? I asked. He turned to look at me, and I saw that he was different too. There was something in his eyes that hadn't been there before, a kind of understanding. I'm never going back there, he said quietly. Good. And I'm never digging up another burial site, never disturbing another sacred place. That's wise. They're really there, aren't they? The guardians, even if nobody else believes it. I sat down in the chair next to his bed. Mr. Kowalski, I'm going to tell you something, and I want you to listen carefully. What happened on Roan Mountain last night was a warning. The Cherokee people consider those burial sites sacred. They've been protecting them for over 1,000 years. But the Bone Warriors are a story, a legend. But legends exist for a reason. They're warnings passed down through generations. They tell us that some places should be left alone. Ray nodded slowly. I understand. I hope you do. Because if you ever try to disturb a sacred site again, I can't guarantee that you'll be as lucky as you were last night. He stared at me for a long moment. You're one of them now, aren't you? He whispered. I didn't answer. I just stood up and walked toward the door. Ms. Whitman? I stopped. Thank you for saving my life. Don't waste it, I said. That was 42 years ago. I'm retired now, officially. But I never really left Roan Mountain. I bought a small cabin about 5 miles from the burial sites. I volunteer with the Park Service, leading educational tours and teaching visitors about Cherokee culture and the importance of protecting archaeological sites. But my real job started that night in 1983. I'm the guardian now, the living guardian of all the sacred places in these mountains. Ray Kowalski kept his word. He never disturbed another burial site. In fact, he became something of an advocate for archaeological preservation. He moved back to Georgia and started working with the State Parks Department, protecting historic sites. Eddie Martinez's body was never found. The official report says he probably fell off a cliff during the storm and was buried by snow. His remains will turn up someday when the mountain decides to give them up. Thomas Bradley was buried in Atlanta. His family never knew what he was really doing up on Roan Mountain. As far as they know, he was just a hiker who got caught in a freak storm. The burial sites were officially protected as a cultural resource area. No digging, no camping, no metal detecting. Rangers patrol the area regularly, but they're not the only guardians watching over those ancient mounds. On cold nights when the wind blows through the mountains just right, you can still hear them. The bone rattlers, the skeletal warriors who protect their ancestors' rest. Most people think it's just the sound of ice rattling in the trees. But I know better. I've seen them a few times over the years, usually when someone tries to disturb the sacred places. They don't often have to intervene anymore. Word gets around among the artifact hunters and grave robbers. Roan Mountain is off limits. Too dangerous. Too many strange accidents. But sometimes someone doesn't get the message. 3 years ago, a group of college kids from Tennessee decided to do some amateur archaeology up on the mountain. They had metal detectors and shovels, and they'd read about the Cherokee burial sites online. I found them before they found the mounds. I explained that the area was protected and that they needed to leave. They were good kids. They just didn't know any better. They packed up their equipment and hiked back down the mountain. But one of them came back that night. He was an archaeology student who thought he knew better than some old lady park volunteer. They found him the next morning, sitting cross-legged in front of the largest burial mound. He was alive, but he couldn't speak, couldn't move, just sat there staring at something no one else could see. The doctors said it was catatonic shock brought on by hypothermia. He spent 3 weeks in a psychiatric hospital before he recovered enough to talk. When he did, he told everyone who would listen about the skeletal warriors who had surrounded him in the Niggas, how they had spoken to him in an ancient language about respect and honor and the proper treatment of the dead. Nobody believed him, of course, but he never went back to archaeology. He changed his major to social work and now helps homeless veterans in Nashville. The warriors let him live because he was young and didn't know better. But they made sure he understood the message. I'm 77 years old now. I don't have much time left. But I'm not worried about what happens after I die. I know where I'm going. I'll join the bone rattlers of Roan Mountain. I'll help them guard the sacred places for as long as the mountains stand. And sometimes, on quiet nights when the moon is dark and the wind is still, people hiking near the burial sites report hearing something strange, a soft rattling sound, like bones clicking together in the cold. They think it's just the ice settling in the trees. But I know better. We're still here, still watching, still protecting what needs to be protected. And we always will be. My name was Catherine Whitman. Now I'm something more. I'm a guardian of the sacred places, and I'm not alone. My name is James Caldwell, but everyone calls me Jimmy. I've been a forest ranger for 16 years now, working these mountains in North Georgia. Blood Mountain has been my beat for most of that time, and I thought I knew every trail, every creek, and every old cabin foundation in these woods. I was wrong. It was September of 1979, and the leaves were just starting to turn. The air had that crisp bite that comes with harvest time, and I was doing what I always did this time of year, checking on the old homestead sites before winter set in. My job wasn't just about keeping hikers safe. I also took care of the historical places, the old cabins and settlements that told the story of who lived here before it all became national forest. My great-grandfather had homesteaded somewhere up here before the government bought the land in the 1930s. That made this work personal for me. These weren't just old buildings, they were pieces of family history, pieces of who we mountain people used to be. I'd been married to Sarah for 12 years, and we had twin boys, Mark and Michael, both 10 years old. They loved coming up here with me on weekends, exploring the old places, asking me to tell them stories about the people who used to live in these hills. I always told them the truth, that these were tough people who worked hard and loved their families just like we did. I never told them the ghost stories, never believed them myself. Old places just hold memories, I figured. Stone and wood and time, that's all. The morning I found the Whitaker place, I was following an old logging road that most people had forgotten about. My truck could only get so far before the path got too narrow and overgrown. From there, I had to hike. The nearest real road was 12 miles away. Up here, you were about as alone as a person could get. I had my camera, my notebook, and a tape measure, stand, art equipment for documenting historical sites. The Park Service wanted everything cataloged before they decided what to preserve and what to let nature take back. The Whitaker homestead sat in a little valley between two ridges, hidden from the main trail. Most hikers would never find it. The cabin was mostly gone, just the stone foundation and chimney left standing. But the root cellar was still there, built right into the hillside with a heavy wooden door that somehow hadn't rotted away. According to my research, the Whitaker family had lived here from about 1910 until 1918. 12 children they'd had. Big family, even for those days. Then the Spanish flu came through these mountains like wildfire, and it took them all, parents and children both. The story was that neighbors buried them somewhere on the property before fleeing the area themselves, too scared of the sickness to do much more than that. I'd heard the tale before. Every old family in these parts had flu stories. 1918 was a bad year everywhere, but it hit mountain communities especially hard. Isolated places like this, where help was far away and medicine was scarce. But standing there in that little valley, looking at what was left of the Whitaker place, I felt something I'd never felt at any other historical site. The air was too still, too quiet. Even the birds seemed to avoid this spot. I told myself it was just the trees. They grew thick here, blocking out most of the sunlight. That would make any place feel spooky. But as I walked around the foundation taking pictures and measurements, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The root cellar bothered me most. It was cut deep into the hillside with stone walls and that heavy wooden door. When I put my hand on the door, it was cold. Not just cool, actually cold, like touching ice. And this was September in Georgia. It should have been warm. I tried to tell myself it made sense. Root cellars were supposed to stay cool. That's what they were for, keeping food fresh before people had electric refrigerators. But this felt different. This felt wrong. I took pictures of everything, wrote down my measurements, and made notes about the site's condition. Professional work, just like always. But the whole time, I kept looking over my shoulder, kept expecting to see someone standing at the edge of the trees, watching me. Nobody was there. Nobody ever was. By the time I hiked back to my truck, the sun was getting low. I had what I came for, documentation of another historical site. But driving home that evening, I couldn't get the Whitaker place out of my head. Couldn't forget how cold that door had felt under my hand. At dinner, Sarah asked me about my day. I told her about finding the homestead, about the family that died there. The boys wanted to know if I'd seen any ghosts. No such thing as ghosts, I said, like I always did. Just old places and sad stories. But that night, lying in bed, I kept thinking about that root cellar door. And I kept wondering why 12 people would choose to be buried so far from any church, so far from any proper cemetery. I told myself I'd go back in a few days, take more pictures, maybe see if I could find where they were buried. It was part of the job, documenting everything properly. At least, that's what I told myself. 3 days later, I drove back up the mountain. This time I brought more equipment, a better camera, a metal detector to look for grave sites, and a thermos of coffee. I figured if I was going to spend most of the day at the Whitaker place, I might as well be comfortable. The hike in felt different this time. The woods were quieter than before, if that was possible. My footsteps seemed too loud on the old leaves. Even my breathing sounded harsh in the stillness. When I reached the homestead, I stopped at the edge of the clearing. Something was different, but I couldn't put my finger on what. The stone foundation looked the same. The root cellar door was still closed, tight. The trees were the same trees. But something had changed. I walked around the site slowly, trying to figure out what was bothering me. That's when I noticed the temperature. It had been a warm morning when I started hiking, probably 70 degrees, but here in the valley it felt like it was barely 50. My breath was starting to fog. I checked my thermometer, 62 degrees. That was a drop of at least 8 degrees from the trail above. Valleys could be cooler, sure, but this felt like more than just elevation and shade. I started with the metal detector, sweeping it in wide circles around the cabin foundation. If there were graves here, the metal would pick up nails from coffins, belt buckles, maybe jewelry. The detector stayed quiet for most of the morning, just the occasional beep from old nails or horseshoe fragments. Then I tried it near the root cellar. The machine went crazy. Not the steady beep you get from finding metal. This was a wild, chattering sound, like it couldn't make up its mind what it was detecting. The needle on the display jumped back and forth so fast I couldn't read it. I turned the detector off and back on, thinking maybe something was wrong with it. Same crazy noise. I moved it away from the root cellar, and it worked fine. Moved it back, and the chattering started again. Electronic equipment could be funny around certain kinds of rock, I knew that. Maybe there was iron ore in the hillside or some other mineral that was messing with the detector. But I'd never heard one act quite like this. I decided to try taking some pictures instead. Maybe I'd spot something with the camera that I was missing with my eyes. The first few shots came out normal, just the stone foundation, the root cellar, the surrounding trees. But when I got to the pictures I took near the cellar door, something was wrong with them. In the viewfinder, I could see the door clearly. Heavy wood, iron hinges carved with what looked like initials and dates. But in the photographs, there were shapes in front of the door. Pale shapes, like shadows. But shadows don't show up light in pictures. I took the same shot 3 times. All 3 came out the same way. Those pale shapes clustered around the door like people standing there. But I could see the door clearly with my own eyes. Nothing was blocking it. My hands started shaking a little as I looked through the camera again. Through the viewfinder. Just the door. Click. In the photo, more of those pale shapes. That's when I heard it. Singing. It was so faint I almost missed it. A child's voice, maybe more than one, singing something soft and slow. A lullaby or maybe a hymn. The sound seemed to be coming from underground, from somewhere beneath the root cellar door. I stood very still and listened. The singing continued for maybe 30 seconds, then faded away completely. When it stopped, the forest was so quiet I could hear my own heartbeat. I walked over to the root cellar door and pressed my ear against the wood. Nothing. But the door was even colder than it had been 3 days ago. Cold enough that my ear started to sting from the contact. I tried the handle. It was an old iron latch, probably original to the 1910s. It lifted easily, but the door wouldn't budge. Not stuck. Locked. From the inside. That made no sense. Root cellars didn't have locks on the inside. They were for storing food, not for keeping people in or out. And this door had been closed for over 60 years. How could it be locked from the inside? I walked around to the back of the root cellar, where it went into the hillside. Maybe there was another entrance, or at least a way to see inside. But the back was just solid stone and earth. No windows, no other doors. I came back to the front and tried the handle again. This time it opened. The door swung inward with a long, rusty creak. Beyond it was darkness, and a smell like old earth and something else. Something sweet and sick, like flowers left too long in water. I had a flashlight on my belt. The beam cut through the darkness and showed me stone walls, dirt floor, wooden shelves along the sides. A normal root cellar, just like dozens of others I'd seen in these mountains. But it was cold in there. So cold, I could see my breath in the flashlight beam. I stepped inside, and that's when I saw them. On the wooden shelves, lined up like they were still waiting to be used, Mason jars full of preserved food. Peaches, beans, corn, pickles. The lids were rusty, but the food inside looked fresh, like it had been canned yesterday. Impossible. Food didn't keep for 60 years, not even in the best root cellar. These jars should have been empty, or full of black mold, or broken by now. But they weren't. They looked good enough to eat. I picked up one of the peach jars and held it up to my flashlight. The peaches were golden and perfect, floating in clear syrup. The label, written in a woman's careful handwriting, said July 1918, for the children. July 1918. The month before the flu took the Whitaker family. I set the jar back on the shelf carefully. My hands were shaking again, and not just from the cold. I backed out of the root cellar and closed the door firmly behind me. The latch clicked shut, and I heard it, the sound of a lock turning on the inside. I tried the handle again. Locked. I packed up my equipment and hiked back to my truck faster than I probably should have. All the way down the mountain, I kept telling myself there had to be logical explanations. Underground springs could keep a root cellar cold. Certain preservation methods could keep food fresh longer than normal. Old doors could stick and unstick for all kinds of reasons. But I couldn't explain the photographs. I couldn't explain the singing. And I couldn't explain how a door had locked itself from he inside. That night at dinner, Sarah noticed I was quiet. "Everything okay?" she asked. "You look like you've seen a ghost." The boys laughed at that. "Dad doesn't believe in ghosts," Mark said. "That's right," I said, forcing a smile. "No such thing." But later, alone in my office, I looked at those photographs again, those pale shapes near the root cellar door. The more I stared at them, the more they looked like children. 12 children. I stayed away from the Whitaker place for a week, told myself I had other sites to document, other work to catch up on. But the truth was, those photographs had spooked me. Every time I looked at them, I saw more details in those pale shapes. The suggestion of faces, of old-fashioned clothes, of small hands reaching toward the camera. Sarah found me looking at them one evening after the boys had gone to bed. "What are those?" she asked, settling into the chair next to my desk. "Photos from that old homestead I found," I said. "Something's wrong with the camera, I think. Keep getting these weird exposures." She picked up the photo that showed the shapes most clearly. "They look like people," she said after a moment. "Light tricks. Shadows, maybe, or reflections." But Sarah had grown up in these mountains, too. She knew the stories as well as I did. "Which homestead?" she asked quietly. "The Whitaker place, up on Blood Mountain." Her face went still. "Jimmy," she said, "that's where those children died, during the flu." I know the story. My grandmother used to talk about it. Said the neighbors were too scared to bury them proper, just put them all in the root cellar and sealed it up. I looked at her. "In the root cellar?" That's what she said. Whole family. All 12 children and the parents. Too scared of the sickness to do anything else. I thought about those mason jars lined up on the shelves. "For the children," the label had said. Food preserved for children who were already dead. Or maybe not dead. Maybe buried alive. "I have to go back," I said. "Jimmy, no. Leave it alone." But I couldn't. If there was then a chance that family had been buried alive, that they'd died trapped in that root cellar, then I owed it to them to find out the truth. I owed it to my own family's history in these mountains. 2 days later, I hiked back to the homestead. This time I brought different equipment, a crowbar, a heavy flashlight, and a camera with fresh film. If the door was locked from the inside, I'd find another way in. If those shapes in the photos were real, I needed to know what they were. The walk-in was different again. The temperature drop started before I even reached the valley, and by the time I got to the homestead, it was cold enough that I wished I'd brought a heavier jacket. But it wasn't just the cold that was different. The whole place felt more alive somehow. Not in a good way. Like something that had been sleeping was starting to wake up. The root cellar door stood open. I stopped at the edge of the clearing and stared. I knew I'd closed that door. I'd heard it lock from the inside. But now it stood wide open, and I could see my flashlight beam from the last visit still shining inside. That was impossible. My flashlight battery couldn't have lasted 9 days. I walked closer, every instinct telling me to turn around and leave. The smell from the root cellar was stronger now, not just old earth and sweet decay, but something else. Something like sickness. I peered inside. The flashlight was sitting on the dirt floor where I must have dropped it. Still shining, though that couldn't be right, and the mason jars were gone from the shelves. All of them. Every single jar of preserved food had vanished. But there were other things on the shelves now. A child's doll made of corn husks and scraps of fabric. A wooden top carved and painted with care. A small pair of shoes, too small for any adult. Children's toys and clothes arranged carefully on the shelves like they were waiting for their owners to come back. I stepped inside and the temperature dropped another 20 degrees. My breath came out in thick white clouds and frost was forming on the stone. Walls. That's when I heard them talking. Not singing this time, but talking. Children's voices, faint but getting clearer. They seemed to come from deeper in the root cellar, from areas my flashlight couldn't reach. "Mama said she'd come back," one voice said. A girl, maybe 8 or 9 years old. "She's not coming back," said another voice, older, a boy. "Nobody's coming back." "I'm cold," said a third voice. This one was very young, maybe 3 or 4. "We're all cold," said the older boy's voice. "We'll always be cold." I took another step into the root cellar, and my flashlight beam reached the back wall. There was writing there, scratched into the stone with something sharp. Names and dates. Mary Whitaker, age 16, died October 15, 1918. John Whitaker, age 14, died October 16, 1918. Sarah Whitaker, age 12, died October 16, 1918. The list went on. 12 names, 12 children, all with death dates in October 1918. But below the names, scratched in different handwriting, smaller, more desperate, were other words. Not dead. Still here. So cold. Help us. "You can see us now," said a voice right behind me. I spun around and there they were. 12 children, standing in the doorway of the root cellar, pale as moonlight, dressed in old-fashioned clothes, staring at me with hollow, hungry eyes. The oldest one, a girl who must have been Mary, stepped forward. "We've been waiting," she said. "Waiting for someone who could see us, who could help us." "You're dead," I whispered. "Are we?" asked the boy who must have been John. "We can't tell anymore. We've been here so long, so cold, so hungry." The smallest child, barely more than a baby, started crying. The sound echoed off the stone walls like breaking glass. "Make it stop," Mary said, and I realized she was talking to me. "Make the cold stop. Make the hunger stop. Make the darkness stop." I backed toward the door, but more children moved to block my way. Not threateningly, but desperately, like they were afraid I would leave them alone again. "We tried to get out," John said. "For so many years we tried, but the door was locked. They locked us in here when we got sick, left us to die." "But we didn't die," Mary said. "Not all the way. We're still here, still cold, still waiting." I pushed past them and ran. They didn't try to stop me, but I could hear them calling after me as I fled the valley. "Don't leave us! Please don't leave us alone again!" I ran all the way back to my truck, my heart pounding and my lungs burning. When I got home, Sarah took one look at my face and made me a cup of coffee with whiskey in it. "What happened?" she asked. I told her everything. The open door, the voices, the children I'd seen. She listened without interrupting, and when I finished, she was quiet for a long time. "My grandmother was wrong," she finally said. "They weren't buried in the root cellar. They were locked in there, left to die. Sarah, I don't know what I saw. Maybe it was—" "You saw them," she said firmly. "Those poor children have been trapped there for 60 years, and now they need help." I looked at her. What kind of help? The kind only the living can give the dead, she said. You have to go back, Jimmy. You have to help them find peace. I knew she was right, but I also knew that going back to the Whitaker place might mean never coming home again, because those children were hungry, and they'd been alone in the cold and dark for far too long. I spent 3 days researching everything I could find about the Whitaker family and the 1918 flu epidemic. What I learned made my blood run cold. The Whitakers hadn't just died of influenza. According to old county records, they'd been quarantined in their own home when the sickness hit. The county health officer had now nailed boards over their doors and windows to keep the disease from spreading. The family was supposed to signal if they needed supplies by hanging a white cloth from an upstairs window. The white cloth had appeared for 3 days. Then it stopped. When neighbors finally worked up the courage to check on them 2 weeks later, they found the house empty. No bodies, no sign of what had happened to 14 people. The assumption was that they'd died and someone had buried them somewhere on the property. But I knew better now. They hadn't been buried. They'd been locked in their own root cellar, probably put there when they got sick to keep them away from the healthy family members. And when everyone else died, there was no one left to let them out. They'd died slowly, trapped underground, starving and freezing and calling for help that never came. No wonder their spirits couldn't rest. I also learned something else. According to the research I found at the County Historical Society, I was related to the Whitakers. My great-great-grandmother had been a Whitaker before she married, which meant those children were my family. That night, I told Sarah what I'd discovered. You have to go back, she said. They're family, Jimmy. You can't leave family trapped like that. What if I can't help them? What if they're too far gone? Then you'll have tried. That's more than anyone has done for them in 60 years. The next morning, I packed differently for the trip to the homestead. Along with my usual equipment, I brought things my grandfather had taught me about when I was young. Salt for purification, iron nails for protection, a small Bible for prayers, and white candles for guiding spirits to rest. I also brought something else, a shovel. If those children needed proper burial, I was going to give it to them. The hike to the valley was the hardest yet. The temperature dropped with every step, and by the time I reached the homestead, it was below freezing. Ice was forming on the trees, and my breath came out in thick white clouds. The root cellar door was open again, but this time I could see light coming from inside. Not electric light, the warm yellow glow of candles. I approached slowly. Inside the root cellar, dozens of candles were burning on the shelves and floor. They cast dancing shadows on the walls, and in those shadows, I could see them all. All 12 children sitting in a circle on the dirt floor like they were having a meeting. When they saw me, they looked up with expressions of hope and desperation. You came back, Mary said. I promised myself I would, I said, though I didn't remember making that promise out loud. Are you going to help us? Asked John. I'm going to try. But first, I need to know exactly what happened to you. The story they told me was worse than I'd imagined. When the flu hit the family, the parents had moved the sick children to the root cellar to isolate them from the healthy ones. But the disease spread anyway. Soon, everyone was sick. The parents died first, upstairs in the house. The older children tried to take care of the younger ones, but they were sick too, and they were locked in the root cellar with no way out. We called and called, said little Susan, who couldn't have been more than 4. But nobody came. We got so cold, said Mary, and so hungry. The food ran out after a few days. We tried to break down the door, John added, but we were too weak, and it was too strong. They died one by one over the course of 2 weeks. The older children had lived the longest, watching the younger ones fade away. Mary had been the last to die, alone with 11 corpses in the dark. But we didn't go away, she said. We couldn't. We were so scared, so angry. We held on to each other, and we held on to this place. We've been here ever since. What do you need from me? I asked. We need to be remembered, Mary said. We need proper names on proper graves. We need someone. To say goodbye to us the right way. We need to know we mattered, John said. That we weren't just forgotten. I nodded. I can do that. But you have to do something for me, too. You have to let go. You have to stop holding on to this place and let yourselves rest. The children looked at each other uncertainly. What if we let go and there's nothing? Asked Susan. What if we just disappear? What if there's something beautiful waiting for you? I countered. What if your parents are there, healthy and happy, waiting to see you again? I spent the next hour in that freezing root cellar, talking to 12 children who had been dead for 60 years. I told them about the family they'd never met, their cousins and nieces and nephews who were still living in these mountains. I told them how their story would be remembered, how I'd make sure there was a proper marker for them, and I told them it was okay to go. We're scared, Mary whispered. I know, I said. But you've been brave for so long. You can be brave a little longer. One by one, I said their names. I lit a white candle for each child and spoke a prayer my grandfather had taught me about guiding lost souls to rest. As I did, the temperature in the root cellar began to rise. The children started to fade, becoming translucent, becoming light. Thank you, Mary said as she disappeared. Thank you for not forgetting us. The last thing I heard was Susan's little voice, no longer cold and frightened, but warm and happy. Mama! I see Mama! Then they were gone. The candles went out all at once, and I was alone in the dark root cellar. But it wasn't cold anymore. It was just a normal underground room, storing nothing but old air and older memories. I climbed out and closed the door one last time. It didn't lock. It was just a door now, nothing more. I spent the rest of that day digging. In the woods behind the root cellar, I found what I was looking for, a depression in the earth where the ground had settled over the years. 12 small graves, hastily dug and never properly marked. I couldn't move. The bodies. But I could give them what they'd asked for. I made 12 wooden crosses from fallen branches, and on each one I carved a name and the dates I'd found in the county records. When I was finished, the Whitaker children had proper graves with proper markers. 6 months later, the Park Service approved my recommendation to preserve the Whitaker homestead as a historical site. There's a plaque there now that tells the story of the family who lived and died there and the names of all 12 children. Hikers sometimes stop to read it and pay their respects. The root cellar is sealed now, permanently closed with concrete and steel. Not because it's dangerous, but because it's become a memorial. Some places should be left undisturbed once the spirits have found their rest. I never told the full story to anyone except Sarah. The official report said I'd found evidence of graves on the property and recommended historical preservation. Nothing about voices or apparitions or children trapped between life and death. But sometimes, when I'm hiking alone in these mountains, I think I hear them playing. Not the desperate, hungry sounds they made when they were trapped, but the happy sounds children should make. Laughter and singing and the sound of running feet on old leaves. I like to think they found their parents waiting for them, wherever souls go when they finally let go of the world. I like to think they're warm now and fed and safe. My own boys are older now, 16 and starting to think about college. Sometimes they hike with me to the Whitaker site, and they always ask to hear the story of the children who lived there. I tell them the official version, about the flu epidemic and the isolated family and the tragedy of lives cut short. I don't tell them about the night I spent talking to ghosts in a freezing root cellar. I don't tell them about the children who'd been waiting 60 years for someone to remember their names. Some stories are too heavy for the living to carry. Some stories are meant to stay buried with the dead, but on quiet. Nights, when the wind blows through the trees just right, I swear I can still hear them. Not calling for help anymore, but calling goodbye. A dozen voices, young and clear and finally at peace, saying thank you to the mountains that held their secrets for so long. The Whitaker children are home now, all of them, together as they always wanted to be. And sometimes that's the most any of us can hope for. My name is Elizabeth McKinnon, but everyone calls me Liz. I've been a park ranger for 14 years now, working in the Jefferson National Forest here in Virginia. Before that, I was a medic in the Army. I thought I'd seen everything that could go wrong in the world. I was wrong. It was March of 1988 when everything changed. The winter had been harsh that year, and even though spring was supposed to be coming, the mountains still held onto the cold like a mean old dog with a bone. I was living alone in my cabin near the base of Walker Mountain, just me and my German Shepherd Rex. He was a good dog, smart and loyal. Better company than most people, if I'm being honest. I'd moved out here after my divorce 3 years earlier. The city had gotten too loud, too crowded. Too many memories of things I wanted to forget. Out here in the mountains, I could breathe again. The work suited me, helping lost hikers, checking on campsites, making sure people stayed safe in the wilderness. It was simple, clean work that made sense. That morning started like any other. I was drinking my coffee and checking the weather reports when the radio crackled to life. Static filled my kitchen, then cleared up enough for me to hear dispatch. Ranger McKinnon, we've got a situation on Walker Mountain. Missing hiking party, 5 college kids from Richmond. Last radio contact was yesterday evening. I set down my coffee cup. Missing hikers in March with a storm system moving in. That was serious business. Copy that. What's their last known location? North Face camping area, about 3 miles up the main trail. But Liz, there's something else. We just got the weather update. Big storm coming in, worse than predicted. Snow, high winds, the works. You might be our only shot at reaching them before it hits. I looked out my window at the gray sky. The clouds were getting darker by the minute. How long do I have? Maybe 4 hours before it gets really bad. After that, nobody's going up that mountain until it passes. I was already reaching for my gear. I'm on my way. Rex followed me around the cabin as I packed my emergency supplies. Medical kit, rope, emergency shelter, flares, extra food and water. Everything I might need for a search and rescue in bad weather. Rex knew the routine. His tail was wagging, but his ears were alert. He was ready to work. The drive to the trailhead took 30 minutes on mountain roads that were already getting slippery. By the time I parked my truck and shouldered my pack, the first snowflakes were starting to fall. Rex jumped out and immediately started sniffing around, his nose working overtime. Come on, boy, I said, clipping his leash to my belt. Let's go find these kids. The trail up Walker Mountain wasn't too hard in good weather, but with snow starting to fall and the wind picking up, it was getting tricky fast. I'd done this hike hundreds of times, though. I knew every rock, every turn, every place where people usually got into trouble. What I didn't know was that this time would be different. This time, something was waiting up there in the storm. As we climbed higher, Rex started acting strange. He kept stopping and looking around, his ears pointed straight up. A few times he whined low in his throat, something I'd never heard him do before. Good search dogs don't get spooked easy, but Rex was definitely spooked. What is it, boy? I asked, stopping to scan the trees around us. Nothing looked out of place, just pine trees heavy with snow and the sound of wind getting stronger. Then I heard it for the first time. It was faint at first, almost lost in the wind. A whistling sound. High and sweet, like someone playing a flute somewhere far away. It was actually pretty in a haunting sort of way, but Rex didn't like it at all. His hackles went up and he pressed close to my legs. Easy, Rex, I said. But I was starting to feel uneasy too. There was something about that sound that made my skin crawl. It reminded me of the whistle a bomb makes when it's falling, that moment before everything goes to hell. The whistling stopped as suddenly as it had started. Rex relaxed a little, but he kept looking back over his shoulder as we continued up the trail. I tried to shake off the weird feeling, but it stuck with me like mud on boots. By the time we reached the camping area where the college kids were supposed to be, the snow was falling hard and the wind was howling through the trees. I could barely see 20 feet in any direction, but what I could see made my heart sink. There were 5 tents set up in a perfect circle, their bright colors standing out against the white snow. But something was wrong. The tents were too neat, too perfectly arranged, and they were all empty. I approached the campsite carefully, Rex staying close to my side. The snow was already covering any tracks that might have been there, but I could see signs that people had been here recently. A camp stove was still set up, with what looked like the remains of last night's dinner frozen to the bottom of a pot. "Hello," I called out, my voice getting swallowed by the wind. "This is Park Ranger McKinnon. Can anyone hear me?" Nothing but the wind and that weird whistling sound starting up again. This time it seemed to come from all around us, echoing off the trees and rocks. Rex whimpered and tried to hide behind my legs. I unzipped the first tent. Sleeping bags were laid out perfectly, like someone had taken time to arrange them just so. Personal gear was scattered around, backpacks, clothes, hiking boots, but no people. It was like they had just vanished. The second tent was the same, and the third. All empty, all too neat and tidy. In 14 years of search and rescue, I'd never seen anything like it. When people abandon a campsite in an emergency, they leave things messy, scattered. I grab what they can and run. This looked more like someone had cleaned house before leaving. But leaving to go where? And why would 5 experienced hikers leave their shelter right before a major storm? I was checking the 4th tent when I found the radio. It was a good one, military grade, the kind serious hikers carry for emergencies. I turned it on and heard nothing but static. The whistling sound was getting louder, and it seemed to be affecting the radio somehow, making the static pulse in rhythm with the melody. "This is Ranger McKinnon calling dispatch," I said into the radio. "I'm at the missing hikers' campsite. No sign of the party, but all their gear is here. Something's not right." Static was all I got back. The storm must be interfering with the signal, or maybe it was something else. That whistling was getting inside my head now, making it hard to think straight. I tried the radio again. This time, through all the static, I heard something that made my blood run cold. It was a voice, faint and distorted, but definitely human. Following the beautiful music. So beautiful. Can't stop. Then nothing but static again. Rex was pulling on his leash now, trying to get me to follow him toward the tree line. His nose was working overtime, and he kept looking back at me with an expression I'd never seen before. It wasn't just worry. It was fear. "What did you find, boy?" He led me to the edge of the camping area where the forest started getting thick. There, barely visible under the fresh snow, was a line of footprints. 5 sets, all heading in the same direction, away from the safety of the camp, deeper into the woods. I knelt down and brushed snow away from the clearest print. It was from a hiking boot, size 10 or 11, probably belonging to one of the male students. But what worried me was the direction they were heading, straight toward the north, the face of Walker Mountain, where the ground dropped away into a series of cliffs and ravines that were dangerous even in good weather. The whistling was getting stronger now, and I realized it was coming from the same direction as the footprints. It was hauntingly beautiful, like a siren song from the old stories my grandmother used to tell. Part of me wanted to follow it, to see where it was coming from. But my military training kicked in. When something seems too good to be true, it usually is. And when something tries to lure you away from safety, you don't follow it. You get the hell out of there. "Come on, Rex," I said, standing up. "We need to track them down before they get themselves killed." Rex didn't want to follow the trail. He planted his feet and refused to move forward. This was completely unlike him. He was a trained search dog, and following tracks was what he lived for. But something about this trail had him terrified. I had to half drag him for the first 100 yards until finally he gave in and started following reluctantly. The footprints were easy to follow even in the snow. The hikers had walked single file, not running or stumbling like people who were lost or panicked. They'd walked calmly and steadily, like they knew exactly where they were going. That scared me more than anything else so far. We'd been following the trail for about 20 minutes when Rex suddenly stopped dead. His whole body went rigid, and a low growl rumbled in his chest. I looked ahead and saw why. There was a person standing in the trees about 50 yards away, just standing there, perfectly still, facing away from us. It was one of the hikers. I could see the bright red jacket that matched the description we'd been given. "Hey!" I called out. "Are you okay? I'm a park ranger." The figure didn't move, didn't even seem to hear me. Just stood there like a statue while the snow fell around them. I approached carefully, Rex hanging back as far as his leash would let him. As I got closer, I could see it was a young man, maybe 20 years old, whipped and with dark hair covered in snow. He was staring straight ahead with a blank expression, and his lips were moving slightly. He was humming along with the whistling sound. "Son?" I reached out and touched his shoulder. "Can you hear me?" He turned toward me slowly, like he was moving underwater. His eyes were open but completely unfocused. It was like looking at someone who was sleepwalking. When he saw me, he smiled. A dreamy, distant smile that made my skin crawl. "The music," he said in a voice that was barely above a whisper. "It's so beautiful. I have to follow it." Before I could stop him, he turned and started walking again, heading straight toward the cliffs. I grabbed the young man's arm, but he was surprisingly strong. He shook me off and kept walking, still humming that haunting melody. Rex was barking now, a sharp, urgent sound that cut through the wind. "Stop!" I yelled, running after him. "You're heading for the cliffs!" But he didn't stop. If anything, he walked faster. I could see the edge of the ravine ahead through the falling snow, and I knew that in about 30 more yards, the ground would just drop away into nothing. I tackled him from behind, bringing us both down into the snow. He struggled underneath me, trying to get up, still humming. His eyes were rolled back in his head, and he was smiling that terrible, empty smile. "Let me go," he said. "I have to follow the music. It's calling to me." I'd seen combat shock before, and this looked similar, but different. This kid wasn't traumatized. He was like he'd been hypnotized or drugged. I got my medical kit out and checked his pulse. It was slow and steady, too steady for someone who'd been lost in a blizzard all night. "What's your name?" I asked, trying to keep him focused on me. "David," he said, but his eyes were looking past me, toward the sound of the whistling. "David Patterson. The music is so beautiful. Why won't you let me follow it?" I looked around for something to tie him up with. I couldn't carry an unwilling person back to the campsite, and I still had to find the other 4 hikers. But while I was digging in my pack, David went limp. At first I thought he'd passed out, but when I checked his pulse, there was nothing. His eyes stared up at the gray sky, and that dreamy smile was still on his face. He was dead, but I couldn't figure out why. No wounds, no signs of injury or illness. It was like his body had just decided to quit. Rex was going crazy now, barking and pulling on his leash. I looked up to see what he was so worked up about, and my heart nearly stopped. There were 3 more figures standing in the trees, just standing there, perfectly still, like David had been. Even through the snow, I could see their bright hiking jackets, the rest of the missing group. And beyond them, barely visible through the storm, was something else. Something tall and pale that didn't belong in these woods. Something that was making the whistling sound. I tried to call out to the hikers, but my voice caught in my throat. The whistling was getting louder, more complex, like a whole orchestra of flutes playing together. And it was beautiful. God help me, it was the most beautiful sound I'd ever heard. Part of me wanted to walk toward it, to see what was making such incredible music. My feet actually started moving before I caught myself. That's when I realized what was happening to the hikers. They weren't lost or confused. They were being called, lured by something that used music the way a spider uses its web. I forced myself to look away from the pale figure and focus on the 3 hikers. They were standing at the very edge of the cliff, teetering on the brink. One of them, a girl with blonde hair, was already lifting one foot like she was about to step off into empty air. "No!" I screamed, running toward them. But I was too late. The blonde girl stepped forward into nothing, still smiling that empty smile. She fell silently, the whistling music, swallowing up any sound she might have made. The other 2 followed her, one after another, walking off the cliff like they were stepping through a doorway. I reached the edge just in time to see their bodies hit the rocks 200 feet below. Rex was barking frantically, but I barely heard him. All I could hear was that whistling, and all I could see was that pale figure in the trees, watching me. It was tall, maybe 9 feet, and thin like a scarecrow. Its skin was the color of old snow, and it had long arms that reached almost to the ground. But its face was almost human, except for the mouth. The mouth was too wide, and when it opened to make that whistling sound, I could see rows of sharp teeth inside. It was looking right at me, and I could feel something pushing at the edges of my mind. A voice that wasn't quite a voice, telling me to come closer, telling me that the music was beautiful, that I should follow it, that everything would be peaceful if I just walked toward the cliff. My feet started moving on their own. I took one step, then another. The whistling was so lovely, and I was so tired. It would be easy to just follow the sound, to let it take me wherever it wanted to go. Rex bit me. He clamped down on my leg hard enough to draw blood, and the pain snapped me out of whatever spell I'd been under. I looked around and realized I'd walked halfway to the cliff edge without even knowing it. "Good boy," I gasped, falling to my knees. "Good boy, Rex." But when I looked up, the pale figure was gone, and so was the whistling. The only sound was the wind and the snow, and Rex whimpering beside me. I knew I had to get out of there. Whatever that thing was, it had killed 5 people, and it was still somewhere in the storm. I gathered up David's body, I wasn't about to leave him for that creature, and started the long trek back toward the trail. That's when I heard Rex scream. Dogs don't scream like people do, but that's the only way I can describe the sound he made. I turned around and saw him standing rigid, his eyes rolled back, just like David's had been. The whistling had started up again, and it was calling to my dog. "Rex, no!" I dropped David's body and lunged for my dog, but I was too late. He ran straight for the cliff edge and jumped, still making that awful screaming sound. I was alone on Walker Mountain with a creature that could control minds, and the storm was getting worse by the minute. I don't know how long I sat there in the snow, staring at the spot where Rex had disappeared. It might have been minutes or hours. The cold was starting to get to me, making me sluggish and confused. But every time I tried to stand up and head back down the mountain, I'd hear that whistling again, faint and far away, calling to me. I knew now what it was. Some kind of predator that used sound to lure its prey, like those deep-sea fish with the glowing lights. Except this thing hunted people, and it had been doing it for a long time. How else could it be so good at what it did? I tried to remember everything I could about fighting off mental attacks from my military training. Focus on pain, focus on anger, focus on anything that would keep my mind sharp and clear. I bit down on my tongue until I tasted blood, used the pain to stay alert. The storm was getting worse. I could barely see 10 feet in any direction, and the wind was strong enough to knock me down if I wasn't careful. But I couldn't go back down the mountain yet. That thing was still up here somewhere, and it wasn't finished hunting. I was right. The whistling started up again, closer this time, much closer, and through the swirling snow, I could see that pale shape moving between the trees. It was following me, staying just at the edge of my vision, like a wolf stalking a wounded deer. Every few minutes it would whistle, and I'd feel that tug in my mind, that voice telling me to come closer. But I kept biting my tongue, kept focusing on the pain, and managed to resist. I was getting tired, though. Every time it tried to control me, it took a little more out of me to fight back. I needed to end this, one way or another. I found a clearing where I could see in all directions and waited. If this thing wanted me, it was going to have to come out into the open to get me. I pulled out my emergency flare gun. It wasn't much of a weapon, but it was all I had. The whistling stopped. For a moment, the only sound was the wind. Then I heard footsteps in the snow, slow and deliberate, circling the clearing. The creature was taking its time, enjoying the hunt. "Come on," I said out loud. "I'm right here. What are you waiting for?" It stepped into the clearing. Up close, it was even worse than I'd thought. Its skin wasn't just pale. It was translucent, like I could see the dark blood moving underneath. Its arms were too long, its fingers ended in black claws, and its face, God, its face looked almost human until you saw the mouth. When it opened its mouth to whistle, it stretched impossibly wide, showing those rows of needle-sharp teeth. The sound it made wasn't just music anymore. It was like a physical force, pressing against my skull, trying to get inside. I could feel my will starting to crumble, feel that dreamy peacefulness washing over me. But I also felt something else. Anger. Pure, burning rage at this thing that had killed 5 innocent kids and my dog. That anger cut through the mental fog like a knife. I raised the flare gun and fired. The flare hit the creature in the chest and exploded in a shower of red sparks. It let out a shriek that was nothing like the beautiful whistling. This was the sound of something in pain and fury. The spell broke completely, and I could think clearly again. The creature was on fire, its translucent skin burning like paper, but it wasn't dead. It came at me with so long arms reaching, claws extended. I rolled to the side and felt the wind from its swipe as it missed my head by inches. I had one more flare, but I was saving it. Instead, I pulled out my knife. Just a standard ranger's knife, but it was sharp, and I knew how to use it. The creature turned toward me, and I could see intelligence in its pale eyes. Not animal cunning, but real intelligence. This thing was smart, and it was angry that I'd hurt it. The burns on its chest were already starting to heal. It opened its mouth and whistled again, but this time the sound was different, harsher, more urgent, and I could feel it trying to get into my head, trying to make me drop the knife and walk over to those waiting claws. I bit down on my tongue so hard I thought I might bite it off. The pain cleared my head, and I lunged forward with the knife. The blade went into the creature's stomach, and black blood poured out over my hands. It felt like ice water. The creature screamed again and backhanded me across the clearing. I hit a tree hard enough to see stars, but I held onto the knife. When I looked up, the creature was standing over me. Its wound was already closing, the black blood stopping its flow. It reached down with one long arm and grabbed me by the throat. This close I could smell it, like old meat and wet earth and something else. Something that reminded me of graves. Its grip was freezing cold and stronger than anything human. I could feel my windpipe starting to crush. With the last of my strength, I pulled the pin on my second flare and jammed it right into the creature's mouth. The explosion lit up the whole clearing like daylight. The creature's head snapped back, and it let go of me, stumbling backward with flames pouring out of its mouth and nose. This time, the shriek it made was weaker, more like a whimper. It looked at me one more time with those pale, intelligent eyes. Then it turned and ran, crashing through the trees and disappearing into the storm. I lay there in the snow, gasping for breath and watching the trees burn where its flaming blood had splattered. I was alive, but barely, and I had no idea if the creature was gone for good or just temporarily retreating. They found me 3 days later, half frozen and barely conscious. The rescue team said I was hypothermic and delusional, talking about creatures and whistling sounds. The official report listed the deaths of the 5 college students as accidental, disorientation and exposure leading to fatal falls from the cliffs. Nobody believed my story about the creature. Why would they? Even I started to wonder if I'd imagined it all. Severe cold can cause hallucinations, and I'd been through a lot of trauma. Maybe my mind had created the monster to make sense of a senseless tragedy. But I knew better. I spent 6 months on medical leave, seeing therapists and trying to get my head straight. The nightmares were the worst part. Dreams about that whistling sound, about pale faces in the trees, about Rex running toward the cliff edge. I couldn't handle heights anymore, couldn't even climb a ladder without breaking into a cold sweat. When I came back to work, I requested a transfer. No more mountain assignments for me. They moved me to a flat coastal park where the biggest threat was sunburn and jellyfish stings. But I didn't stop thinking about Walker Mountain. I started researching quietly, on my own time. Looking through old newspapers, death records, local folklore. What I found made my blood run cold. The whistling deaths went back over 150 years. Different decades, different victims, but always the same pattern. People found dead at the bottom of cliffs, always during storms, always with that same peaceful expression on their faces. Local tribes had stories about it too. Warnings about the whistling death that lived in the high places and called people to their doom. I tried to warn other rangers, but nobody wanted to listen. I was the crazed lady who'd cracked under pressure, who saw monsters where there were only accidents and bad luck. so I kept my research to myself and waited. Last month, I got a call from a ranger in Weston, Virginia. 3 hikers had gone missing during a winter storm on Seneca Rocks. They found the bodies at the bottom of a cliff, all with the same peaceful expressions. And right before they died, someone had reported hearing strange whistling sounds coming from the mountain. It's still out there, still hunting. And I'm the only one who knows what it really is. Sometimes, late at night, I think I can hear that whistling in the wind. It's faint and far away, but it's there, calling to me, trying to finish what it started on Walker Mountain. I keep my flare gun loaded and ready, just in case, because I know that someday it's going to come looking for the one that got away. My name is Michael O'Brien, but everyone calls me Mike. I've been a forest ranger for 18 years now, working the Cherokee National Forest in Tennessee. Before that, I spent 6 years underground in the coal mines, just like my daddy and his daddy before him. Mining runs in the O'Brien blood, you could say. But sometimes I wonder if that's more of a curse than a blessing. It was August 1991, and the heat was killing everything. The trees looked like they were dying of thirst, their leaves curling up brown at the edges. Even the birds had gone quiet. I was driving my pickup up the old mountain road to Copper Hill Basin, windows down because the air conditioning had given up the ghost 2 days before. The radio crackled with static, then went dead. That should have been my first warning. I was heading up to check on the old copper mines. The state was thinking about opening them up for tours, maybe bringing in some tourist money to help the local folks. My job was to make sure they were safe, check for bad air, weak supports, that kind of thing. I'd done it 100 times before at different sites. Should have been easy work. The road got rougher as I climbed higher. Weeds grew up through cracks in the asphalt, and tree branches scraped against my truck like fingers trying to hold me back. I hadn't seen another car in 30 minutes. Up here, you could disappear and nobody would find you for weeks. Finally, I reached the old mining camp, or what was left of it. A few wooden buildings still stood, but most had fallen down or been taken back by the forest. Vines covered everything like green bandages trying to heal old wounds. The biggest building had been the company store, where miners bought their supplies. Now its windows stared out like empty eye sockets. I parked and grabbed my gear, hard hat with a light air tester, rope, first aid kit, the basics for going underground. As I walked toward the mine entrance, something crunched under my boots. I looked down and saw old glass bottles, rusty cans, and scraps of metal. Trash from when this place was alive, 70 years ago. The main mine shaft cut into the mountain like a black mouth. Rails for the ore carts ran right up to the edge, then disappeared into darkness. A metal sign hung crooked next to the entrance. Danger, abandoned mine, keep out. The letters were faded, but still readable. I clicked on my headlamp and stepped inside. The air felt different immediately. Cooler, but thick somehow, like breathing through wet cloth. My light beam pushed about 20 feet into the tunnel before the darkness swallowed it up. The walls were rough rock, stained orange and green from old copper deposits. About 50 feet in, I stopped to test the air. My meter showed normal oxygen levels, no dangerous gases. Good so far. I marked the spot with chalk and kept going deeper. That's when I heard it. Tap, tap, tap. Metal on stone. Like someone hitting rock with a pickaxe, way down in the depths of the mine. I stopped walking and listened hard. The sound came again, slow, steady, echoing up from somewhere deep below. "Hello?" I called out. My voice bounced off the walls and faded away. No answer. Just that tapping sound, patient as a heartbeat. Could be anything, I told myself. Water dripping on metal, rocks settling. Old mines make all kinds of noises. But I'd been in dozens of abandoned mines, and this was different. This sounded like someone working. I kept walking deeper, following the main tunnel as it curved to the left. My light picked up something strange on the ground. Fresh wood shavings. Little curls of pine, like someone had been whittling. But the wood was clean and yellow, not dark and rotten like it should have been after 70 years. The tapping got louder as I went. Deeper. Now I could hear other sounds too. The squeak of metal wheels, like an ore cart rolling along tracks. But that was impossible. The mine company had pulled up most of the rails when they abandoned the place in the 1920s. I rounded another corner and stopped dead. My light shone on a pile of copper ore stacked neat and tidy beside the tunnel wall. The chunks were clean, with bright green streaks running through them. Fresh-cut ore, like it had been pulled from the rock yesterday. My hands started shaking. I'd read the old records before coming up here. This mine had been worked out in 1925. There hadn't been any good ore left. That's why the company shut it down. So where did this come from? The tapping stopped suddenly, like whoever was doing it had heard me coming. The silence felt heavy, like something watching and waiting. I clicked off my light and stood very still in the darkness. That's when I heard the voices. The voices drifted up from somewhere far below, faint as smoke, but clear enough to make out words. Men talking in low tones, their words bouncing off rock walls before reaching my ears. "Jimmy, bring that cart over here. Watch your head on that timber." This vein's running deeper than we thought. I turned my light back on and followed the sound. The main tunnel split into 3 smaller passages, all sloping down into the mountain. The voices came from the middle one. I could see old wooden support beams, some looking solid as the day they were put up. That didn't make sense either. Wood rots fast in mines. These should have collapsed decades ago. As I walked down the sloping tunnel, my light caught something that made my blood turn cold. Fresh footprints in the dirt. Boot prints, size 10 or 11, with deep treads like work boots. And they were heading the same direction I was. I stopped and looked behind me. My own footprints showed clear in the dust, but these other ones were different. Deeper, like whoever made them was carrying something heavy, and there were a lot of them, going both ways, like people had been walking this tunnel all day long. The voices got clearer as I went deeper. "Tommy, check that support beam. Looks like she's starting to sag. Air's getting thick down here. Maybe we should head up for a bit." "No, sir. Boss wants this section finished by end of shift." I knew those voices weren't coming from any living men, but they sounded so real, so normal. Just miners doing their work, same as miners everywhere. Except these men had been dead for 70 years. The tunnel opened up into a bigger chamber, maybe 30 feet across. My light swept around the walls and I saw things that shouldn't exist. Fresh wooden beams holding up the ceiling, clean copper ore sorted into piles, pickaxes and shovels leaning against the wall, their handles smooth and unworn. And in the center of it all, an ore cart sitting on rails that gleamed like they'd been laid yesterday. I walked over to the cart and touched it with one finger. Real metal, solid and cold. I pushed it gently and it rolled forward with a squeaking sound, the same sound I'd been hearing from above. "You shouldn't be down here, mister." I spun around so fast I nearly fell over. A man stood at the far end of the chamber, just at the edge of my light beam. He wore dirty overalls and a cloth cap with a pickaxe hanging from his belt. His face was hard to see in the shadows, but I could make out a thick mustache and deep-set eyes. "Mine's not safe for visitors," he said. His voice sounded normal, but hollow somehow, like an echo of an echo. "Cave-ins happen all the time." I tried to speak, but no words came out. The man stepped closer, and I could see him better. His clothes were old-fashioned, like pictures from the 1920s. His skin looked gray, like he'd been underground too long without seeing sunlight. "I'm a forest ranger," I finally managed to say. "I'm here to check on mine safety." The man tilted his head, studying me. "Hushu. Anger, huh? What's your name, son?" "Michael O'Brien, Mike." His eyes went wide. "O'Brien? You wouldn't be kin to Patrick O'Brien, would you? Big Irish fellow, worked the number 3 shaft." My heart started pounding. That was my grandfather, but he died in 1925. The man nodded slowly. "Aye, he did. Good man, Patrick. Tried to warn us about the gas pocket in level 5. Company wouldn't listen." He looked at me with sad eyes. "You got his look about you. Same stubborn jaw." I backed toward the tunnel entrance. but more men appeared in the shadows. 5, 6, maybe 7 of them. All dressed like my grandfather's time. All carrying mining tools. All staring at me with those gray, hollow faces. "We've been working down here a long time," said the first man. "Ever since the cave-in. Company said it was an accident, but we know better. They knew about the gas. Knew the supports were weak. Sent us down anyway because they wanted that copper." Another man stepped forward, younger than the first, with blonde hair under his cap. 47 of us died that day. Never saw sunlight again. Never got to say goodbye to our families. Been working these tunnels ever since, trying to finish what we started." "You need to leave," said the first man, his voice getting harder. "This is our place now. Our work. We don't need any rangers or inspectors or company men coming down here telling us what's safe and what's not." I reached for my radio, but it was nothing but static. Too deep underground, too much rock between me and the surface. I was on my own. "I just want to help," I said. "Make sure nobody else gets hurt." The man with the mustache laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. "Help? Like the company helped us? Like they helped our families after we died? Left them with nothing, not even bodies to bury?" The group of men started moving closer. Their boots made no sound on the rocky floor, but I could feel them coming like a cold wind. One of them dragged his pickaxe behind him, metal scraping on stone. "We know why you're really here," said another voice. "From the shadows. Want to bring tourists down into our mine, turn our grave into a carnival ride, make money off our bones." I ran. I stumbled back up the tunnel, my light bouncing wildly off the walls. Behind me I could hear them following, not running but walking with the steady pace of men who had all the time in the world. Their voices echoed after me. "Can't leave now, boy. Work's not finished. Your grandfather would want you to stay." I reached the main tunnel and turned toward the entrance, toward sunlight and fresh air and the world of the living. But something was wrong. The tunnel looked different now. Wooden support beams crossed overhead where none had been before. Rails ran along the floor, leading deeper into the mountain instead of out. And the air tasted of copper dust and old death. I kept running, but the tunnel seemed to stretch on forever. My light showed the same rock walls, the same wooden beams over and over, like I was running in place. Behind me, the voices got closer. "No use running, Mike O'Brien. Mountain's got you now, just like it got us." Finally, I saw light ahead. Real light, not the yellow beam from my helmet. Daylight, streaming in through the mine entrance. I put on a burst of speed and burst out into the afternoon sun. But I wasn't at the entrance anymore. I stood on a wooden platform built into the side of the mountain. Below me, the mining camp spread out like it was 1925 again. The buildings were whole and painted, smoke rising from chimneys. Men in work clothes walked between the structures, carrying lunch pails and tools. I could hear voices, laughter, the sound of hammers on metal. "Welcome to Copper Hill Hollow," said a voice behind me. I turned around. The man with the mustache stood there, looking more solid now, more real. His overalls were cleaner, his face had more color, but his eyes were still empty, still, cold as winter shadows. "This is how it was," he said, "before the company got greedy, before they cut corners on safety to save a few dollars. We were good men, Mike, honest workers. We deserved better." Other miners gathered on the platform around us. I could see them clearly now, their faces, their names embroidered on their work shirts. Tommy Walsh, Jimmy Peterson, David McLeod, names I remembered from the old accident reports. "Your grandfather tried to warn us," said Tommy Walsh. He was the young blonde one I'd seen in the mine. Came running out of level 5, shouting about gas. Said the company knew about it, knew it was dangerous. But the foreman called him a troublemaker. "Fired him that very day," added Jimmy Peterson. "Walked him right out of the camp. Lucky for him, he missed the explosion by 2 hours." I looked down at the camp below. It was beautiful in a way, like a picture from a history book. Men working together, doing honest labor. But there was something wrong with the light. Too golden, too perfect. Like looking at the world through amber. "This isn't real," I said. The camp's been abandoned for 70 years. You're all dead." The mustached man, I still didn't know his name, nodded sadly. "Aye, we're dead, but we remember. We remember what it was like before, and we remember how it ended. Company sealed us in when the mine collapsed, told everyone we died quick, that there was nothing they could do. But some of us lived for hours in the dark, breathing poison air, calling for help that never came. Our families never knew the truth," said Tommy. "Company paid them a little money, told them to keep quiet, said it was nobody's fault, just one of those things that happen in mines." "But it wasn't," growled another man, older with scars on his hands from years of hard work. "Company knew about the gas pocket, knew the supports were rotting. They had reports from the state inspector, warnings from the union. Ignored them all because pulling out that copper was more important than keeping us alive." I felt something tugging at my jacket and looked down. A boy, maybe 13 years old, stood beside me. Too young to be a miner, but he wore the same clothes as the men. "I just brought them their lunch," he said in a small voice. "Wasn't supposed to be down there. But the cage was coming up, and I thought I'd ride it to the surface. Then everything went dark." My heart broke looking at him. Just a kid, probably helping to feed his family, caught in a disaster that should never have happened. "What do you want from me?" I asked. The man with the mustache pointed down at the camp. "Company's coming back. New owners, new equipment. They want to reopen the mines, dig out what copper's left. But the mountain's still dangerous. Gas pockets, weak stone, rotten supports. They don't care, just like before. All they see is profit." "More men will die," said Tommy. "Good men with families. Unless someone stops them." "Someone who knows the truth," added Jimmy. The boy tugged at my jacket again. "You could tell people what really happened. Make them listen. Make them remember us." I looked around at their faces. Dead men and a dead child, all looking at me with desperate hope. They'd been trapped here for 70 years, unable to rest, unable to move on, waiting for someone to hear their story. "How?" I asked. "Who would believe me? I don't have any proof." The mustached man smiled for the first time. "Oh, but you do, Mike O'Brien. Your grandfather saved more than his own life when he walked out of this camp. He took something with him, something the company thought was buried forever." The world around me started to fade. The perfect light grew dim. The sounds of the camp grew distant. The wooden platform began to creak and sag under my feet. "Time's running short," said the man. "Company surveyors will be here tomorrow. Once they start blasting, we'll be lost forever. The truth dies with us." "What do? Did my grandfather take?" I shouted as the platform collapsed beneath me. I fell into darkness, their voices echoing all around me. "Ask your grandmother. The box in the attic. Save them, Mike. Don't let it happen again." I woke up in my truck, slumped over the steering wheel. The sun was low on the horizon, painting the abandoned mining camp in shades of red and gold. My head pounded like someone had hit me with a pickaxe. I checked my watch. Nearly 6 o'clock. I'd been unconscious for hours. My first thought was that I'd been overcome by bad air in the mine. Happens sometimes. Carbon monoxide, methane, other gases can build up in closed spaces. Makes you see things, hear voices. But my air tester showed normal readings when I checked it. I looked toward the mine entrance. It was just a black hole in the rock, same as when I'd arrived. No wooden platform, no sounds of men working, just silence and shadows. But I couldn't shake what I'd seen and heard. The faces of those dead miners felt more real than the steering wheel under my hands. And they'd mentioned my grandmother, something in her attic, something my grandfather had taken from the mine. I drove down the mountain as fast as I dared, my headlights cutting through the growing darkness. I had to get to Grandma O'Brien's house while she was still awake. She was 87 now, and she went to bed early. Her little white house sat on Elm Street in town, same place she'd lived since marrying my grandfather in 1923. I knocked on the door, trying to calm my racing heart. "Michael," she said when she opened it. "What brings you by so late? You look terrible, dear." "Grandma, I need to ask you about Grandpa, about his time at the Copperhill mines." Her face went pale. She looked around nervously, then pulled me inside. "What do you want to know?" "He was there the day of the cave-in, wasn't he? The day 47 men died?" She sat down heavily in her rocking chair. "He never talked about it. Never. Said it was too painful to remember. But yes, he was there. Walked out just hours before it happened. Ed, did he ever say why? Why he left that day?" Grandma was quiet for a long time, rocking back and forth. Finally, she spoke in a whisper. "He found something. Papers, documents the company didn't want anyone to see. Proof they knew the mine was dangerous." My heart started pounding again. "Where are they, Grandma? Do you still have them?" She pointed toward the ceiling. "Attic. In his old steamer trunk. He made me promise never to throw them away, but never to show them to anyone either. Said they were too dangerous, that the company would hurt our family if they knew Patrick had taken them." 10 minutes later, I was in the dusty attic pulling papers from a metal box. My grandfather's handwriting covered page after page. Notes about gas readings, unsafe support beams, company orders to ignore safety warnings, and there were official documents too. Reports from state inspectors, memos from company executives, union complaints that were filed away and forgotten. The worst was a letter from the mine foreman to company headquarters dated 2 days before the cave-in. "Workers continue to report dangerous gas levels in level 5. Recommend immediate evacuation and safety review before proceeding. However, copper deposits in this area are extremely valuable. Please advise on acceptable risk levels." The response came back the next day. "Continue operations as planned. Copper prices are at all-time high. Minor safety concerns should not interfere with production schedule." 47 men died because of those words. I drove straight to the sheriff's office, even though it was nearly midnight. Sheriff Davis had been a friend of my family for years. He'd listen, even if the story sounded crazy. "Mike, what in the hell are you doing here so late?" he asked when I burst through the door. I spread the papers across his desk. "Bill, I need you to look at these. They're and the 1925 mining disaster at Copperhill Hollow." He put on his reading glasses and studied the documents. His face grew more serious with each page. "Jesus, Mike, where did you get these?" "My grandfather. He was there the day of the cave-in. He knew what was going to happen and tried to warn the other miners. Company fired him for it." "These documents. They prove the company knew the mine was unsafe. Knew men would die and sent them down anyway." He looked up at me. "This is murder, Mike. Mass murder." "There's more," I said. "New companies moving in tomorrow. They want to reopen the mines. Same owners, different name. They haven't learned anything." Sheriff Davis was already reaching for his phone. "Not on my watch, they're not." The next morning, a convoy of sheriff's cars blocked the road to Copperhill Hollow. State investigators arrived by noon, followed by reporters and lawyers. By evening, the story was on the news across 3 states. The mining company tried to deny everything at first, said the documents were fakes, that the 1925 accident was just bad luck. But the papers were too detailed, too official to dismiss. And when investigators started digging into the company's current safety record, they found the same pattern of ignored warnings and cost-cutting measures. Within a week, the company's mining permits were revoked. Within a month, the families of the 1925 victims had filed lawsuits based on the evidence my grandfather had saved. It took 2 years, but eventually, they won. The mining company paid millions in damages to the descendants of the dead miners. A year later, I stood at the entrance to the Copperhill Hollow mine for the last time. Instead of surveying for tourist access, I was there for the dedication of a memorial. A granite marker now stood beside the mine entrance, listing the names of all 47 men who died in 1925. At the bottom, it read, "They died not from accident, but from greed. Let their sacrifice ensure this never happens again." The mine entrances had been properly sealed now, made safe so no one else would be hurt. The old mining camp was being turned into a historical site, but not the kind that makes light of tragedy. This would be a place of remembrance, where school children could learn about the cost of putting profits before people. As the crowd of family members and officials dispersed, I walked closer to the mine entrance. The granite memorial gleamed in the afternoon sun, and fresh flowers lay at its base. For the first time since that strange day underground, I felt at peace. "Thank you, Mike." I turned around, half expecting to see empty air. But there he was, the man with the mustache, looking more solid and real than ever. The other miners stood behind him, including the young boy who'd just been bringing lunch. "We can rest now," said Tommy Walsh. "Our families know the truth. The company's been punished. No one else has to die in these mountains." "Your grandfather would be proud," added Jimmy Peterson. "He saved a lot of lives by taking those papers, and you saved even more by bringing them to light." The boy stepped forward and handed me something, a small piece of copper ore, bright green and beautiful. "For remembering us," he said. "Will I see you again?" I asked. The mustached man, I finally saw his name on the memorial. Samuel Morrison, age 34, shook his head. "Our work here is finished. Time to move on to whatever comes next." He tipped his cap to me. "Take care of these mountains, Ranger O'Brien. They're in good hands." One by one, they faded away like morning mist. Not frightening this time, but peaceful. Men finally going home after 70 years of waiting. I still work as a forest ranger, still check on abandoned mines and make sure they're safe. But I've never found another place like Copper Hill Hollow, where the dead refused to stay buried until justice was done. Sometimes late at night when I'm alone in the mountains, I think I hear distant voices carried on the wind, miners calling to each other, tools ringing against stone, the squeak of ore carts on rusty rails. But they're not trapped anymore. They're not angry or desperate. They're just echoes now, reminders of men who worked hard and died too young, but whose sacrifice wasn't forgotten. The piece of copper ore sits on my desk at home, next to a picture of my grandfather in his mining clothes. Both remind me that some debts can only be paid with the truth, no matter how long it takes to tell it. And sometimes, when the mountain wind blows just right through my open window, I swear I can hear Samuel Morrison's voice, faint as a whisper. "Good work, Mike O'Brien. Good work." My name is Marcus Rutherford, but everyone calls me Mac. I've been a park ranger for 19 years now, working the Cherokee National Forest in Tennessee. My daddy was a ranger before me, and his daddy before him. We Rutherfords have been watching these mountains for 3 generations. I'm telling you this story because I need someone to know what really happened up on Copperhead Ridge in October of 1976. The official report says different, but the truth needs telling before I'm too old to remember it right. I was 43 then, still young enough to handle the rough country, but old enough to know better than to go looking for trouble. My specialty was backcountry work, tracking down poachers, illegal hunting camps, and the occasional moonshine operation that still dotted these hills, like my granddad's time. October in the mountains is something special. The leaves turn gold and red, and there's a bite in the air that lets you know winter's coming. That year, we had early frost warnings, and the deer were moving down from the high country earlier than usual. That's when I got the call about illegal hunting up near Copperhead Ridge. Some hikers reported hearing gunshots and seeing deer carcasses hanging from trees. It was a good 25 miles from the nearest town, deep in the hollow country where cell phones didn't work and my radio would be useless half the time. I should mention something about that area. My Uncle Tommy went missing up there in 1946. They found his body 3 days later at the bottom of a cliff, said he must have fallen in the dark. But Tommy knew those mountains better than anybody. He could walk them blindfolded. Still, accidents happen, and that's what we all believed. I loaded up my truck with enough supplies for 2 days. The plan was simple: hike in, find the hunting camp, document everything, and haul whoever was responsible back to Fay. See Chargy. I'd done it dozens of times before. Should have been routine. The drive up the old logging road took 2 hours. Every mile took me deeper into country that hadn't changed much since the Cherokee walked these paths. The trees got thicker, the road got rougher, and civilization felt farther away with every turn. I parked at the end of the road, where a rusted gate blocked any further vehicle access. From here, it was all on foot. I strapped on my pack, checked my gear, and headed into the woods. The trail was old but well marked, winding through oak and pine that stretched up like cathedral pillars. For the first hour, everything felt normal. I heard the usual forest sounds: birds calling, squirrels chattering, leaves rustling in the breeze. The air smelled like pine needles and damp earth. My boots crunched on the frost-covered leaves, and my breath made little clouds in the cold air. But as I got deeper into the hollow, something started feeling wrong. At first, I couldn't put my finger on it. Maybe it was too quiet, or maybe the shadows seemed darker than they should. I told myself I was being foolish. I'd never believed in ghosts or mountain spirits like some of the old-timers. To me, the only dangerous things in these woods walked on 2 legs and carried guns. I found the first deer carcass hanging from a tree about 3 miles in. That's when I knew something was really off. The deer was a young buck, maybe 8 points, hanging by its hind legs from a thick oak branch. But it wasn't the sight that bothered me. I'd seen plenty of deer being dressed. It was how it was killed. No bullet holes. Instead, there were deep cuts made by something sharp but crude, like knapped stone or bone. The cuts were precise, but not made by any knife I'd ever seen. Whoever did this knew what they were doing, but they were using tools that belonged in a museum. I took pictures and made notes, trying to stay professional. Maybe it was some survival nuts playing at being primitive hunters. Illegal, but not unheard of. Still, something about the way the deer was positioned bothered me. It faced west toward the setting sun, and its front legs had been arranged in an almost prayer-like position. As I continued up the trail, I found 2 more carcasses, all killed the same way, all positioned facing west. The hunting camp was another half-mile ahead, tucked into a natural clearing surrounded by thick pines. What I found there made my skin crawl. The camp looked like it hadn't been used in decades, but the fire pit had warm ashes. 3 lean-to shelters made from pine branches and bark stood around the clearing. No modern equipment anywhere. No tents, no coolers, no hunting gear. Just primitive shelters and a collection of stone tools scattered around the fire. But it was the smell that really got to me. A thick, musky odor like wet animal fur mixed with something rotten. It stuck in my nose and made my stomach turn. I'd smelled plenty of dead animals in my time, but this was different, stronger, more personal. I was photographing the stone tools when I heard the first whistle. It came from the tree line to my left, a long, low sound that didn't match any bird I knew. I froze, listening. After a few seconds, another whistle answered from the right side of the clearing. Then another from behind me. My hand moved to the pistol on my belt. Whatever was out there, there were at least 3 of them, and they had me surrounded. I tried to look casual as I backed toward the center of the clearing, giving myself room to move in any direction. That's when I noticed my compass was spinning. The needle swung back and forth like it couldn't find north. My watch had stopped too, the hands frozen at 2:17, though I was sure it had been working fine an hour ago. The whistling stopped. The forest went completely silent. No birds, no insects, no wind in the trees. Even my own breathing seemed too loud. I stood there for what felt like hours, but was, probably only minutes, waiting for something to happen. Then I saw the footprints. They were in the soft earth around the fire pit, and I'd somehow missed them before. Bare feet, but wrong somehow. Too long, too narrow, with what looked like claw marks where the toes should be. The stride was human, but the feet weren't quite. I followed the tracks to the edge of the clearing, where they disappeared into the thick underbrush. My hands were shaking as I took pictures. 19 years as a ranger, and I'd never seen anything like it. That's when I decided to get help. This was beyond simple poaching. I needed backup, maybe a full investigation team. I turned to head back down the trail, and that's when I saw her. Granny Whitaker sat on a fallen log about 50 yards down the trail, looking like she'd been waiting for me. She was one of the old mountain people, probably 80 years old, with long gray hair and a face like weathered leather. I'd known her since I was a kid. She lived in a one-room cabin about 5 miles down the mountain. "You best get yourself gone from here, Mac Rutherford," she called out before I got close enough to speak. "This ain't your kind of trouble." I walked over to her, trying to stay calm. "What kind of trouble would that be, Granny?" She stood up, moving with the careful grace of someone whose bones hurt, but whose spirit was still strong. "The Hollow people been stirred up. They don't like strangers in their territory, especially strangers with badges and guns." "Hollow people?" I tried to keep the skepticism out of my voice. She looked at me with those sharp old eyes. "Your Uncle Tommy, he asked the same question 30 years back. Found him at the bottom of Devil's Bluff 3 days later, remember?" My blood went cold. "Tommy fell. It was an accident." "Was it?" She started walking down the trail, moving faster than I would have thought. "Possible. You come with me, boy. We get you out of here before dark. Maybe you live to see tomorrow." I followed her, my mind racing. Granny Whitaker had lived in these mountains her whole life. If she was scared, maybe I should be too. But I was a professional law enforcement officer. I couldn't just run away because of some local folklore. We'd gone maybe a mile when I smelled it again, that thick, musky stench. Granny stopped walking and tilted her head, listening. "Too late," she whispered. "They're already hunting." The last thing I saw before everything went wrong was a pale shape moving through the trees on the ridge above us, keeping pace with our walk, but staying just out of clear sight. I wanted to tell Granny she was imagining things, but the words died in my throat when I saw what was left of her cabin. We'd followed the trail down for another hour, and I'd been looking forward to getting to her place, maybe using her old phone to call for backup. But when we came around the bend, I saw splintered wood and broken glass scattered across the small clearing where her cabin used to stand. The walls had been torn apart from the inside, like something incredibly strong had just punched through them. Her belongings were scattered everywhere, pots and pans, books, quilts, but arranged in careful patterns around a cold fire pit in the center of what used to be her living room. Granny stood there staring at the destruction, tears running down her weathered cheeks. 70 years I lived in that cabin," she said quietly. "My mama built it with her own hands." "Who did this?" I asked, though I was afraid I already knew. "Warning," she said. "They're telling us to stay away, but it's too late for that now. We've seen too much." I was examining the claw marks on what remained of the front door when I heard Granny scream. I spun around and saw her backing away from the tree line, pointing at something I couldn't see. "There," she shouted. "In the shadows." I followed her gaze and caught a glimpse of something that made my blood freeze. A figure, tall and unnaturally thin, watching us from behind a large pine tree. It was pale, almost white, and moved wrong, too fluid, like its joints bent in directions they shouldn't. I drew my pistol. "This is a federal officer. Come out where I can see you." The figure didn't move, didn't speak, just stood there watching us with what looked like yellow eyes that reflected the late afternoon light like an animal's. "Don't look at it direct," Granny whispered. "They don't like being seen." But I was already staring, trying to make sense of what I was looking at. It was definitely human-shaped, but stretched out and wrong. Its arms hung too long, its fingers were too thin, and its face was like looking at a person through dirty water, familiar but distorted. Then it smiled, showing teeth that had been filed to points, and stepped back into the shadows. 1 second it was there, the next it was gone, like it had never existed. "We need to move," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Now!" But Granny wasn't moving. She was staring past me with an expression of pure terror. I turned around and saw why. There were more of them, at least 6 figures standing at the edge of the clearing, all with that same pale, stretched look. They were arranged in a rough circle around us, cutting off our escape routes, and they were all smiling with those horrible pointed teeth. The biggest one, standing directly in front of us, took a step forward. When it spoke, its voice was like wind through dry leaves. Been long time since visitors. The words came slowly, like it was remembering how human speech worked. You, not welcome here. I raised my gun, but my hands were shaking so badly I could barely aim. Stay back. I'm warning you. It tilted its head, studying me with those yellow eyes. Warnings are for the living. Then it let out a whistle, high and piercing. That was answered by the others. That's when they started moving. They didn't run like humans. They moved in a crouched, loping gait that covered ground impossibly fast. I got off 2 shots before the first one reached me, and I swear I hit its center mass, but it just kept coming like the bullets passed right through. I grabbed Granny's arm and ran. We crashed through the underbrush, branches tearing at our clothes and faces. Behind us, I could hear them following. Not just the sound of feet on leaves, but that awful whistling coming from all directions now. They were hurting us, driving us deeper into the hollow where no one would ever find our bodies. Granny was moving faster than any 80-year-old should, but I could tell she was fading. Her breathing was getting ragged, and she stumbled more with each step. "The caves," she gasped as we paused behind a large boulder. "Old moonshine caves. Your granddad showed you." I knew the ones she meant. A network of limestone caves about a mile north, where moonshiners used to hide their stills during Prohibition. My granddad had shown them to me when I was 12, made me promise never to tell anyone about them. "Can you make it?" I asked. She nodded, though she didn't look sure. "Better than staying here." We started moving again, but we'd only gone a few hundred yards when I heard Granny cry out behind me. I turned and saw one of those things had her by the arm, lifting her off the ground like she weighed nothing. I put 3 bullets into it at close range. This time, I saw them hit, saw the black blood spray from its chest, but it barely flinched. It looked at me with those yellow eyes and made a sound that might have been laughter. Then it twisted Granny's neck with a quick, casual motion, like snapping a twig. She went limp in its arms, and it let her fall to the ground. It arranged her body carefully, positioning her arms and legs in that same prayer-like pose I'd seen with the deer. Then it looked up at me and smiled. "Your turn next," it said in that horrible whisper voice. I ran harder than I'd ever run in my life, crashing through the forest with tears streaming down my face. Behind me, that awful whistling started up again, and I knew they were coming. The cave entrance was hidden behind a screen of mountain laurel, just like I remembered. I squeezed through the narrow opening and found myself in the main cavern, a space about the size of a small room with passages leading off in 3 directions. I had my flashlight, my remaining bullets, and maybe an hour before full dark. And somewhere in the tunnels behind me, I could hear them coming, the sound of bare feet on stone, getting closer with each passing minute. The caves were colder than I remembered, and my flashlight beam seemed weaker in the thick darkness. I chose the passage that led deepest into the mountain, hoping to lose them in the maze of tunnels that honeycombed the limestone. But as I moved deeper, I started finding things that made me wish I'd stayed in the main cavern, bones scattered along the tunnel floor. Not just animal bones. I saw what looked like a human rib cage wedged into a crack in the wall, and a skull that watched me pass with empty sockets. Some of the bones had been gnawed on, showing the same tooth marks I'd seen on the deer. The tunnel opened into a larger cavern, and my flashlight revealed something that made me stumble backward in horror. It was like an underground village. Crude shelters made from stacked stones and animal hides filled the space. Fire pits with cold ashes. And everywhere more bones arranged in careful patterns on the cave floor. Circles and spirals and shapes that hurt to look at. This wasn't just a hiding place. This was where they lived. I was backing toward the tunnel entrance when I heard the voice behind me. "Welcome home." I spun around and saw the big one from the clearing standing in the tunnel mouth, blocking my escape. Up close, in the light of my flashlight, it was even more horrible. Its skin was paper white and stretched tight over bones that were too long. Its hair was stringy and colorless, hanging down over a face that was almost human, but not quite. "You like our home?" it asked, spreading its arms to indicate the cavern. "We been here long time. Your people drove us deep, but we survived." "What are you?" I managed to ask. It tilted its head, considering. "We were like you once, long ago, but the mountain changed us, made us better, stronger. We don't need your world anymore." More of them appeared in the tunnel behind it. A whole family group, I realized. Adults and what might have been children, though it was hard to tell in the dim light. They all had that same stretched, pale look, and they all watched me with hungry yellow eyes. "Your uncle, he tasted good," the big one said, and several of them made that awful laughing sound. "Sweet meat, but you, older, tougher, still good for the pot." That's when I understood what had really happened to Uncle Tommy, and what was going to happen to me if I didn't find a way out of this cave. I started backing deeper into the cavern, looking for another exit. The things followed me slowly, in no hurry. They knew these caves better than I did. There was nowhere to run. "Don't be afraid," the big one said. "Death is quick. Eating takes longer." I was almost to the back wall of the cavern when my flashlight beam caught something that gave me hope. Another passage, narrow and low, hidden behind one of their stone shelters. If I could reach it. I waited until they were close, then threw my flashlight as hard as I could at the big one's face. In the moment of darkness and confusion that followed, I dove for the hidden passage. I heard them roar behind me. Not human sounds, but animal cries of rage and frustration. Claws scraped on stone as they tried to follow, but the passage was too narrow for their stretched bodies. I crawled through darkness, feeling my way by touch, praying the tunnel would lead somewhere other than a dead end. Behind me, I could hear them digging, trying to widen the passage with their bare hands and those horrible claws. After what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, I saw light ahead. Real light, not the yellow glow of their eyes. I crawled faster, my knees and elbows bloody from scraping against the rough stone. The tunnel ended at a cliff face, looking out over the valley far below. The opening was barely wide enough for me to squeeze through, but it was better than staying in the cave with those things. I could see the trail that led back to my truck, maybe 3 miles away and 1,000 feet down. If I could reach it before they found another way out of the caves. I started climbing down the cliff face, using every bit of mountaineering skill my daddy had taught me. The rock was slick with frost, and my hands were numb with cold, but I kept moving. Behind me, I could hear them whistling to each other, coordinating their hunt. I was halfway down when I saw them emerging from caves all along the cliff face. Dozens of them, maybe more, pouring out of openings I hadn't even known existed. They moved along the vertical rock like spiders, defying gravity with their clawed hands and feet. But they were still following the ancient rules of their kind. They hunted at night, when the shadows were deep and humans couldn't see them clearly. As long as I could reach the bottom before full dark, I might have a chance. I slipped the last 20 feet, sliding down a steep section of loose shale, and landed hard on the trail. My ankle screamed with pain, but it held my weight. I started running again, ignoring the agony in my leg, racing against the setting sun. Behind me, that horrible whistling filled the air, and I knew they were coming. down the cliff like a pale, hungry tide. I made it to my truck just as the last light faded from the sky. My hands shook so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition. But the engine turned over on the first try. I'd never been so grateful to hear that familiar rumble. As I drove down the mountain, I kept checking my mirrors, expecting to see pale figures running after me on the road. But they were creatures of the deep woods, I realized. They wouldn't follow me back to civilization. Not yet, anyway. I didn't stop driving until I reached the ranger station, 40 miles away. My supervisor took one look at me, covered in blood and cave dirt, talking about hollow people and underground villages, and called for an ambulance and a psychiatric evaluation. The official report listed Granny Witcher's death as accidental. They said she must have fallen and hit her head on a rock. The destroyed cabin was blamed on bears looking for food before winter. My account of the encounter was noted as stress-related hallucinations following traumatic discovery of civilian fatality. 3 days later, I went back with a full team. We found the hunting camp, but all the primitive tools were gone. The caves showed no sign of recent habitation, just empty stone chambers that echoed with our voices. Even the bones I'd seen were gone, leaving only faint stains on the cave floor that could have been anything. But I found Uncle Tommy's journal in the ruins of Granny Witcher's cabin. It had been hidden under a loose floorboard, wrapped in oilcloth to keep it dry. The last entry was dated 3 days before his death in 1946. "They're not human anymore," he wrote. "Don't know if they ever were. Been living in the deep places so long they forgot how to be people, but they remember us, remember how we taste." The area around Copperhead Ridge was quietly designated a geological hazard zone and closed to the public. Official reason: unstable rock formations and dangerous cave systems. The real reason went into a file that only 3 people in the Forest Service ever saw. I request to transfer to a valley station, claiming my leg injury made mountain work too difficult. For the next 15 years, I worked easy trails and visitor centers, helping tourists find restrooms and warning them about poison ivy. But I kept in touch with the old mountain families. Quietly, carefully, I let them know that some of the old stories were true, that there were things in the deep hollows that were best left alone. Most of them already knew, had known for generations. They just nodded and promised to keep their children away from Copperhead Ridge. I retired in 1991, but I still live in the mountains, still keep watch, in my way, because I know they're still up there, in the limestone caves and hidden valleys where the sun never shines. Still hunting, still hungry. Last month, a group of college kids went missing while camping near Copperhead Ridge. The official search found their abandoned tents and some scattered equipment, but no bodies. The case was closed as a probable bear attack, with the victims presumed dead. But I know better. I know what really found them in the darkness between the trees. And I know that somewhere in the deep places under the mountain, there are new bones being arranged in careful patterns around cold fire pits. The hollow people are patient. They've learned to be selective, to take only a few victims each year so no one notices a pattern. But they're still there, still watching the trails and waiting for travelers who wander too far from the light. Sometimes on quiet nights when the wind is still, I can hear them whistling to each other across the ridges, calling and answering, patient as the stone itself, hungry as the winter that never ends in the deep places where they make their home. My name is Marcus Rutherford, and I'm telling you this story because I'm old now, and soon there won't be anyone left who knows the truth. Stay out of the hollow country. Stay away from Copperhead Ridge. And if you ever hear that whistling in the woods at night, don't try to find out what's making it. Just run. Run as fast as you can, and don't look back. Because some things in these mountains are older than memory, hungrier than winter, and they're still hunting for fresh meat to add to their underground feast. The hollow people are real, and they're still waiting in the dark. My name is Dave Thompson, and I've been a park ranger for 15 years. I used to build bridges before this job, real ones made of steel and concrete. I thought I knew everything about how bridges work. I was wrong. It was November 1987 when they sent me to Devil's Fork Gorge in West Virginia. The place got its name for good reason. It's a deep cut in the mountains where two streams crash together 300 feet below. There's only one way across, an old suspension bridge built back in the 1930s. My boss wanted me to check if the bridge was safe. "You're the only guy we got who knows bridges," he said. "Go make sure it won't fall down." The drive took 4 hours on winding mountain roads. The last 20 miles were dirt, and my truck bounced around like a toy. When I finally parked at the trailhead, the sun was already getting low. November days are short up there. The hike to the bridge was about a mile through thick woods. Pine trees stood so close together that hardly any light got through. My boots crunched on dead leaves and old snow. Everything smelled like winter, cold and clean and empty. Then I heard it, a creaking sound, like old wood under weight. But there was no wind, and I couldn't see the bridge yet. The path curved around a big rock, and there it was. The bridge stretched across the gorge like a giant spider web. 2 thick cables hung between tall wooden towers, and the walking surface was made of old wooden planks. It looked exactly like the pictures from the 1930s when the government built it as part of some work program. But something felt wrong. The bridge was swaying just a little, even though the air was still, and it looked— I don't know how to say this. It looked longer than it should have been. I'd read the plans. The bridge was supposed to be 200 feet across, but standing there, it seemed to stretch on forever. I checked. My watch, 4:30. I had maybe an hour of good light left. Time to get to work. I walked to the start of the bridge and pulled out my clipboard. The wooden towers looked solid. The cables were old but not rusty. Someone had been taking good care of this place. Maybe too good. The wood looked like it had been painted recently, but according to my paperwork, no maintenance crew had been out here in 5 years. That's when I noticed the tools. A wooden toolbox sat next to the left tower, like someone had just been working. Inside were old-fashioned tools, hammers with wooden handles, hand saws, rope made of actual rope instead of the synthetic stuff we use now. Everything looked brand new, but from the wrong time period. I picked up one of the hammers. It felt warm, like someone had just been holding it. "Hello?" I called out. My voice echoed off the rocky walls of the gorge. "Anyone here?" Nothing. Just the wind starting to pick up, making the bridge creak and sway. I decided to walk across and check the other side. The wooden planks felt solid under my boots, but every step made the whole bridge move a little. That was normal. Suspension bridges are supposed to move. But this felt different, like something was making it sway on purpose. Halfway across, I stopped. The toolbox was gone from where I'd left it, and there, at the far end of the bridge, stood a man. He was tall and thin, wearing old work clothes, brown pants held up by suspenders, and a faded red shirt. A cloth cap sat on his head, the kind workers wore back in the day. He just stood there watching me. "Hey," I called out. "You okay?" He didn't answer, didn't move, just stared. I started walking toward him, but the bridge began swaying harder. Not from wind. There still wasn't any. It swayed like someone was shaking it. When I looked up again, the man was gone. By the time I reached the other side, it was getting dark fast. The forest looked black between the trees, and fog was starting to rise from the stream far below. I checked the tower on this side, same as the other one. Solid and well-maintained. Too well-maintained. I should have left then. Should have hiked back to my truck and come back in the morning with better equipment. But I'm stubborn, and I wanted to finish the job. That's when I found the inscription carved into the wooden post. Built by James Morrison and crew, 1935. Keeper of the bridge until the work is done. The date was right, but I'd never seen that name in any of the records. The fog got thicker as darkness fell. I pulled out my flashlight and started back across the bridge. The wooden planks felt slippery now, and every step echoed in the gorge below. The beam of my light only reached about 10 feet ahead, making everything beyond look like a gray wall. Halfway back, my light started to flicker. I smacked it against my palm, the old ranger trick. It came back on, but dimmer than before. Fresh batteries, too. I'd put them in that morning. That's when I heard the footsteps. Heavy boots on wooden planks, but not mine. Someone else was on the bridge. The steps came from behind me, steady and even, like someone who'd walked this bridge 1,000 times. I spun around. My light cut through the fog, showing empty planks stretching back to the tower. Nothing there. But the footsteps kept coming. Closer now. "Who's there?" I called out. My voice sounded small and scared. The footsteps stopped. I waited, listening so hard my ears hurt. Just my own breathing and the creak of old wood. Then, from right beside me, a man's voice. "You got business on my bridge?" I jumped so hard I almost dropped my flashlight. There was nobody there. Nobody I could see, anyway. "Where are you?" I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Right here." The voice came from everywhere and nowhere. Been here since 1935, been waiting for someone who knows bridges. My heart was beating so fast I thought it might explode. I'm an engineer. I don't believe in ghosts. There had to be an explanation. Maybe someone was playing a trick. Maybe the fog was making sounds carry weird. "Look," I said to the empty air. "I'm just here to check the bridge, make sure it's safe." "Safe?" The voice laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. "This bridge is the safest thing in these mountains. Been keeping folks safe for 50 years. Question is, are you safe enough to be on it?" My flashlight flickered again, then went out completely. Total darkness, except for a tiny bit of gray sky above the fog. I was stuck in the middle of a suspension bridge 300 feet above a rocky creek, talking to someone I couldn't see. I tried to remember my training. Stay calm. Think logical. Find the real explanation. "My name's Dave Thompson," I said. "I'm a park ranger. I used to build bridges before this job. I know what I'm doing." "Do you now?" The voice was closer, like someone standing right next to me. "Tell me, bridge builder, how many men died making this crossing?" I didn't know what he meant. "Nobody died building this bridge. I read all the reports." "Not building it," the voice said. "Before it was built, right here, where you're standing." The fog started to clear just a little, and my flashlight came back on by itself. In the dim light, I could see shapes in the air around me, like people, but see-through. Men in old-fashioned clothes, women in long dresses, children holding their parents' hands. They all looked sad and scared. "Stagecoach went over the edge in 1887, the voice explained. 12 folks died. That's why they built the bridge here, so nobody else would have to ford the creek, so nobody else would die." The ghost people started to fade away, but I could still feel them watching. "And you are?" I asked. "James Morrison. I built this bridge. Died doing it too. Fell from the tower on the last day. But the work wasn't finished. And still isn't. I should have run. Should have gotten off that bridge as fast as I could and never looked back. But I'm an engineer, and he'd said something that got my attention." "What do? You mean the work isn't finished? The bridge has been done for 50 years. "A bridge isn't just wood and steel," James Morrison said. "It's a promise. A promise to keep folks safe. And promises need keeping." The fog closed in again, thicker than before. I could barely see my own hands, but I could feel something. A presence, cold and patient, circling around me like a wolf. "Every person who crosses this bridge pays a toll," the voice said. "Some pay with money, some pay with respect, some pay with their skills. What are you willing to pay, bridge builder?" I heard footsteps again, but this time they were going away from me, heading toward the far end of the bridge. I followed the sound, my light showing just enough to keep me from stepping off the edge. When I reached the tower, I found something that made my blood turn cold. The toolbox was back, sitting exactly where I'd first seen it. But now it was open, and all the tools were laid out neat and organized, like someone had been getting ready to work. Next to the box was a piece of paper covered in old-fashioned writing. I picked it up and held it in my flashlight beam. It was a work order, dated November 15th, 1987, today. But it was written in the style of the 1930s, like an official government form from the Depression era. Work required. complete inspection and repair of Devil's Fork Bridge. Worker assigned, David Thompson, engineer. Supervisor, James Morrison, bridgekeeper. Work to begin at sunset. No worker leaves until job is done proper. At the bottom, in different handwriting, welcome to the crew, Dave. Time to earn your crossing. I crumpled up the paper and threw it into the gorge. This is crazy, I said out loud. I'm talking to myself in the fog. That's all this is. But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't true. The tools in the box were real. The work order had been written in my name. And so, me, where in the darkness around me, James Morrison was waiting. I decided to get off the bridge and hike back to my truck. I'd come back in the morning with backup and proper equipment, maybe a camera to document whatever trick was being played on me. But when I started walking toward the path, I couldn't find it. My light showed the wooden tower, same as before. But where the hiking trail should have been, there was just more bridge stretching into the fog. Both directions looked the same now, wooden planks disappearing into gray nothing. I was trapped in the middle of a bridge that had somehow become endless. Looking for the exit? James Morrison's voice came from behind me. Won't find one till the work's done. That's the rule. I spun around. This time I could see him, tall and thin, just like before, but clearer now. His work clothes looked old but clean, and his face had the serious expression of a man who took pride in his job. He was solid enough that I could see him clearly, but I could also see through him to the fog beyond. Let me off this bridge, I said. Can't do that. You accepted the job when you stepped onto my bridge with tools in your hands. He pointed at my clipboard and measuring tape. Every man who works here finishes his work. I'm not one of your workers. This isn't the 1930s. James Morrison smiled, but it wasn't friendly. Time works different here. Always has. This bridge exists in all the times it's needed. Past, present, future. Right now, it needs work, and you're the man to do it. The fog around us started to change. I could hear sounds, hammering, sawing, men calling to each other, voices from long ago still doing their jobs. My crew's been waiting 50 years for a real bridge man to help finish what we started, Morrison said. Most folks who cross here aren't qualified. They just pay their toll and move on. But you, no bridges. You can see what needs doing. Against my better judgment, I found myself curious. What needs doing? Morrison walked over to one of the support cables. Up close, I could see that some of the wire strands were frayed. Not dangerous yet, but they would be in a few years. This bridge carries more weight than it was designed for, he said. Back in '35, we figured maybe a few hikers a week. Now there's dozens every day. Heavy packs, big groups. The cables are stressed. He was right. I could see it with my engineering eye. The bridge was still safe, but it wouldn't stay that way forever. The wooden planks are wearing thin in spots, Morrison continued. Tower foundations need reinforcement. Someone who knows bridges could fix all that. Someone who cares about keeping folks safe. I looked at the tools in the box. They were exactly what I'd need for the repairs he was talking about. Old-fashioned tools, but good ones. Tools that had been waiting 50 years for the right person to use them. If I help you, I said, will you let me leave? Morrison's expression grew sad. Dave, you don't understand yet. Nobody leaves this bridge unchanged. The question is whether you leave as a man who abandoned his responsibility or a man who did what needed doing. The fog was getting thicker again, and I could feel the temperature dropping. My breath came out in little clouds, even though it had been mild when I'd hiked in. I have a life outside this bridge, I said. A job. People expecting me back. And they'll see you again when the work's done. Might be tomorrow, might be next week. Depends on how fast you work and how well you do it. Morrison gestured toward the tools. But if you try to leave without finishing, you'll be stuck here forever, just like the others who tried to cheat their way across. Others? He pointed into the fog. Shapes moved in the gray. People walking back and forth, over and over, like they were stuck in a loop. Folks who thought they were too important to pay the toll. Been walking my bridge for years now, trying to find The exit. Never will. I watched the ghost walkers pace back and forth in the fog. Some wore modern clothes, hikers and backpackers who'd come through recently. Others looked older. All of them had the same lost, frustrated expression. Don't end up like them, Dave. You're a good man with useful skills. Help me finish what we started, and go home with pride in your work. I looked at the tools, then at the bridge cables that really did need attention. My engineering brain was already working out how to do the repairs properly. How long will it take? I asked. Morrison smiled, and this time it was warm and genuine. That depends on you. But I promise you this, when you're done, you'll know more about building bridges than any man alive. I picked up one of the hammers. It felt solid and familiar in my hand, like a tool I'd used 1,000 times before. All right, James Morrison, I said. Show me what needs fixing. Working on that bridge in the fog was like nothing I'd ever experienced. Morrison showed me problems I never would have noticed. Tiny cracks in the wooden towers, wear patterns in the cable anchors, spots where water had been slowly weakening the structure for decades. But here's the thing that scared me. I was good at it. Better than good. With those old tools in my hands, I could feel exactly what the bridge needed. It was like the tools themselves knew how to do the work. You're getting it, Morrison said as I replaced a section of cable. Bridge work isn't just about following blueprints. You got to feel what the structure wants. Hours passed, or maybe days. I couldn't tell in the fog. I lost track of time, lost track of everything except the work. Fix this cable, replace that plank, strengthen this joint. Each repair made the bridge feel more solid, more alive. Morrison worked beside me, showing me tricks I'd never learned in engineering school. How to tie knots that would hold for a century. How to read the stress in a cable just by touching it. How to cut wood so it would fit perfect every time. Where did you learn all this? Asked during a break. Same place you're learning it now, he said. The bridge teaches you if you listen close enough. That's when I realized what was happening. The bridge wasn't just a structure. It was alive somehow, connected to everyone who'd ever worked on it. All their knowledge, all their skills, flowing through the wood and steel and into whoever was willing to learn. This is how you really died, isn't it? I said. You didn't fall. You became part of the bridge. Morrison nodded slowly. On the last day, when the work was almost done, I felt it calling to me. Felt how much it needed someone to care for it forever. So I stayed. I looked at my hands. They were cut and dirty from the work, but they didn't hurt. And I noticed something else. When I touched the bridge, I could feel things. The weight of people walking across, the stress of wind and weather, the slow, patient strength that had kept this crossing safe for 50 years. You want me to stay too? I said. Want's got nothing to do with it, Morrison replied. Question is, what kind of man are you? The kind who does a job halfway and moves on, or the kind who sees something through to the end? The fog was starting to clear a little, and I could see we'd made real progress. The bridge looked stronger, newer, like it could last another 50 years easy. But there was still work to do. How much more? I asked. Morrison pointed to the far tower. Foundation work. Hardest part. That's where most folks give up. We walked to the end of the bridge, and he showed me what he meant. The base of the tower was sinking just a little into the rocky ground. Not much, maybe an inch, but enough to stress the whole structure. We got to shore it up from underneath, Morrison said. Means going down into the gorge. I looked over the edge, 300 feet straight down to rocks and rushing water. No way to climb down. And even if there was, no way to carry tools and materials. There's another way, Morrison said quietly. But you won't like it. He led me to a section of the bridge I hadn't noticed before. A trap door in the planks with a rope and pulley system attached to the tower. Built this for maintenance access, he explained. You lower yourself down, work from underneath, come back up when you're done. I stared at the thin rope. It looked strong enough, but the idea of hanging 300 feet above rocks while trying to shore up a bridge foundation was terrifying. This is crazy, I said. I could die. You could, Morrison agreed. But if you don't do it, The bridge dies, and everyone who crosses it afterward might die too. That's the choice, Dave. Risk yourself to save others, or play it safe and let the bridge fail when the next big storm hits. I thought about all the hikers who cross this bridge every year. Families, kids, people just trying to enjoy the mountains. If the bridge failed while someone was on it, I'll need better light, I said, and safety equipment. Morrison smiled. Already thought of that. He opened a wooden crate I hadn't seen before. Inside was everything I'd need. Modern climbing gear mixed with old-fashioned tools, kerosene lanterns that would burn steady in the wind. You've been planning this for 50 years, I said. I've been waiting 50 years for the right man to trust with this job. You're him, Dave. I can feel it in how you work, how you care about doing things right. I strapped on the climbing harness and checked the rope one more time. It felt solid, like everything else Morrison had shown me. If I don't make it back up, I said, tell my boss I died doing my job. Morrison clapped me on the shoulder. You'll make it, but you won't be the same man who goes down. The work under the bridge was the hardest hing I've ever done. Hanging in space with nothing but rope between me and the rocks, trying to shore up a foundation while wind from the gorge tried to spin me like a top. But Morrison talked me through it, his voice calm and steady in my ear. Little more to the left, Dave. That's it. Now drive that stake deep. The strange thing was, I wasn't scared. Tired, yes. Focused, absolutely. But not scared. It felt right, like this was exactly what I was supposed to be doing. When I finally pulled myself back onto the bridge, the sun was rising. The fog had cleared completely, and I could see the beautiful morning spreading across the mountains. The bridge felt solid under my feet, not just repaired, but stronger than it had ever been. Morrison stood at the center of the span, but he looked different now, fainter, like he was fading away. Work's done, he said, and his voice had a satisfied, peaceful sound. Bridge will stand for another century now. Easy. You're leaving, I said. He nodded. Been waiting 50 years to finish this job proper. Now I can rest. What about me? Do I stay here too? Morrison smiled. That's up to you, Dave. You could stay, become the new keeper, or you can go back to your life, but with something extra. I could feel what he meant. The bridge had taught me things, not just about construction and engineering, but about responsibility, about caring for something bigger than yourself. I'd always be connected to this place now. I'll go back, I said, but I'll come back too. Regular maintenance checks, make sure everything stays good. Knew you'd make the right choice, Morrison said. He was almost invisible now, just an outline in the morning light. Take care of her, Dave. She's a good bridge. Then he was gone, and I was alone on the span. I packed up the tools, the ones that were still there anyway. Some had faded away with Morrison, but the work we'd done was real. The bridge was solid, safe, ready for whatever came next. The hike back to my truck took no time at all. I knew the way perfectly now, like I'd walked it 100 times. But when I got to my truck, I had a surprise waiting. My boss was there with a search team. Dave, thank God you're okay. You've been missing for 3 days. 3 days? It felt like one night to me. But when I looked at my hands, they showed 3 days of hard work. And when I looked back at the bridge, I could see what Morrison and I had accomplished. I wrote up my report that evening back in town. Bridge is in excellent condition, I wrote. Recent maintenance work appears to have been completed to very high standards. Recommend regular inspections, but no immediate repairs needed. I didn't mention Morrison or the ghost crew or the night I spent working in the fog. Who would believe it? But I kept the old hammer I'd used, the one tool that hadn't faded away. It sits on my desk now, a reminder of the best work I've ever done. I go back to Devil's Fork Bridge twice a year now, spring and fall maintenance checks. It's always in perfect condition, like someone's still taking care of it. Sometimes I find small repairs that have been done since my last visit, always with the same careful attention to quality that Morrison taught me. And sometimes, when the fog rolls in at sunset, I hear the sound of hammers and saws echoing from the gorge. The work goes on, done by hands that care about keeping people safe. I'm still a park ranger, still an engineer. But now I'm something else, too. A bridge keeper, just like Morrison. Not trapped here, but connected. Responsible for making sure this crossing stays safe for everyone who needs it. The bridge taught me that some jobs never really end. They just get passed from one person to the next, along with the knowledge of how to do them right. And every time I cross that bridge, I can feel Morrison's approval in the steady sway of the cables and the solid feel of the planks under my feet. The work is done, but it's never finished. That's the nature of bridges. They connect one place to another, one person to the next, one generation to all the ones that follow. I keep the old hammer on my desk as a reminder. Good work lasts forever, but only if someone cares enough to keep it going. My name is Robert Hensley, but everyone calls me Rob. I've been a forest ranger for 21 years now, working the deep woods of North Carolina's Pisgah National Forest. At 48, I've seen just about everything these mountains can throw at you. Bears, wildcats, lost hikers, illegal hunters, you name it. But I never believed in ghost stories or forest spirits. That was just nonsense people made up to scare kids around campfires. I should tell you, I'm not the kind of guy who gets spooked easy. Did 2 tours in Vietnam as a combat engineer. Learned to spot booby traps and track enemies through jungle so thick you couldn't see 5 feet ahead. When I came home, the forest felt like peace compared to that hell. Trees don't shoot at you, and the only explosions are from dead branches falling. In June 1985, my boss sent me up to Grandfather Mountain for a solo timber survey. Someone was reporting illegal tree cutting in the backcountry, and they wanted me to check it out. I packed my gear, compass, maps, radio, camping supplies, and headed deep into the wilderness where most tourists never go. The Cherokee who lived here first had stories about this area. They called it the place where tree killers lived, spirits that would punish anyone who hurt the forest. Old-timers in town still whispered about it sometimes. I figured it was just their way of keeping people from overlogging the good timber. That first morning, hiking up the steep trails, everything seemed normal. Birds singing, squirrels chattering, the usual forest sounds. The air was thick and humid, typical for summer in the mountains. My boots crunched on fallen leaves and pine needles. Sunlight filtered down through the canopy in golden patches. I was looking for signs of illegal cutting, fresh stumps, saw marks, tire tracks from logging trucks. Instead, I found something else entirely. About 3 miles in, I came across the first damaged trees. But they weren't cut down. Someone had stripped the bark off them in long, vertical pieces. Dozens of trees, all in a rough circle about 50 yards across. The naked wood underneath was already turning gray and sick-looking. I knelt down to examine the bark that had been peeled away. It lay scattered on the forest floor in neat piles. The edges weren't clean like a saw would make. They were rough, torn, like something had ripped them off by hand. But what kind of tools could do this? And why would anyone want just the bark? My radio crackled. Unit 7, this is base. What's your status? Found some tree damage, I reported. Looks like bark stripping, not cutting. Investigating further. Copy that. Be careful up there, Rob. I followed a trail of damaged trees deeper into the woods. The pattern was weird. They formed rough lines that seemed to follow some kind of system I couldn't figure out. Some trees were completely stripped, others only partially. A few had strange carvings cut into their exposed wood, symbols I didn't recognize. The forest got quieter as I went deeper. Fewer bird sounds. Even the insects seemed muted. I told myself it was just because I was getting farther from the main trails, but something felt off. Around noon, I stopped to eat lunch by a small stream. That's when I noticed my compass was acting up. The needle kept swinging between different directions, like it couldn't decide which way was north. I tapped it a few times, thinking maybe it was broken, but it kept spinning. After lunch, I found more stripped trees. Hundreds of them now, spread across acres of forest. Some looked like they'd been damaged recently. The bark was still moist and sticky. Others seemed older, with the wood underneath starting to rot and attract insects. But here's what really bothered me. I couldn't find any human tracks. Not one boot print in the soft soil around the damaged trees. No tire marks, no tool marks I could identify. Just those rough, torn edges on the bark like it had been ripped off by something with claws. I set up camp that evening feeling uneasy for the first time in years. As a ranger, you learn to trust your instincts. Animals can sense danger before humans can. And I was starting to feel like something was watching me from the dark spaces between the trees. I woke up at dawn to a sound I'd never heard before in 21 years of forest work. It was like wind moving through leaves, but there was no wind. The air was perfectly still. The sound seemed to come from all around me, a soft rustling and creaking that made my skin crawl. I unzipped my tent and looked out. The forest looked different somehow. The trees seemed taller, their branches reaching toward each other like they were trying to touch. Shadows fell in patterns that didn't match where the sun should be. I shook my head, telling myself I was just tired. Mountain mornings can play tricks on your eyes. After a quick breakfast, I continued following the trail of damaged trees. The bark stripping got worse as I went deeper. Entire groves stood naked and dying, their exposed wood white as bone. The smell hit me then, not the clean scent of healthy forest, but something damp and earthy, like soil that's been turned over to expose the worms underneath. That's when I found the first tracks. They were in a patch of soft mud near another stream. At first glance, they looked almost human, 5 toes, a heel, the basic shape of a foot. But they were wrong. Too long, maybe 14 inches from heel to toe. The toes were stretched out like fingers with what looked like claw marks at the tips. I measured them with my ruler and took photographs. Whatever made these tracks was big, probably 7 or 8 feet tall based on the stride length. And there were multiple sets, at least 4 different individuals walking together. The tracks led deeper into the forest, following game trails I'd never set before. As I tracked them, I started noticing other weird things. Trees that had fallen across the path, but their stumps showed no saw marks or storm damage. They looked like they'd been twisted off, the wood splintered and torn. Around midday, I heard voices. Not human voices, I would have recognized those. These were like the wind in leaves sound from the morning, but with a rhythm that almost seemed like words. I couldn't make out what they were saying, but the tone sounded angry, upset about something. I followed the sounds carefully, using trees for cover the way I'd learned in the army. Through the branches, I caught my first glimpse of them. 3 figures stood in a clearing about 100 yards away. They were tall, taller than any human, covered from head to foot in what looked like bark and moss. Their skin, if you could call it skin, was rough and brown like tree bark, with patches of green that moved and shifted like living moss. They were working on a large oak tree, their hands pressed against its trunk. As I watched, the tree's bark began to heal where it had been damaged. Raw wounds sealed themselves. Fresh bark grew over the exposed wood. It was like watching time run backward. One of the figures turned its head in my direction. Even from 100 yards away, I could see its eyes, deep green, like light filtering through leaves. It stared right at me for what felt like forever. Then it opened its mouth and made that wind-through-leaves sound, calling to the others. They all turned to look at me. I backed away slowly, trying not to make any noise. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure they could hear it. Whatever these things were, they weren't human. And they knew I was watching them. I made it back to my camp without seeing them again, but I felt eyes on me the whole way. Every shadow seemed to move, every branch that creaked in the breeze. Might have been one of them following me. That night I barely slept. The wind voice sounds came from all around my campsite, sometimes close, sometimes far away. I kept my flashlight ready and my radio close, but when I tried to call the base station, all I got was static. Just before dawn, I heard footsteps circling my tent. Slow, careful steps that stopped every few feet like something was studying me. The footsteps were too heavy to be human, and they made a weird squelching sound in the leaves, like bare feet walking through mud. I lay there in my sleeping bag, trying to control my breathing, until the sun came up and the footsteps finally went away. In the morning, I found them, those same long tracks all around my campsite, pressed deep into the soft earth. One set came right up to my tent and stopped just inches from where my head had been lying. Something had been watching me sleep. I should have left then. Any reasonable person would have packed up and hiked straight back to the ranger station. But 21 years of forest work had made me stubborn, and my army training taught me never to retreat without understanding the enemy. Besides, I still had a job to do. People were counting on me to find out who was damaging these trees. I just hadn't expected the who to be something that shouldn't exist. I spent the third day mapping the damage patterns, using my compass, which still spun wildly in certain areas, and my topographical maps. I tried to make sense of what I was seeing. The bark stripping formed rough circles and lines that reminded me of something, but I couldn't put my finger on what. Then it hit me. The patterns looked like the old Cherokee medicine symbols I'd seen in museum books, spirals and connecting lines that were supposed to represent healing and protection. But these were huge, carved across acres of forest in dying trees. Around noon, I found a grove where the damage was fresh, so fresh that sap was still bleeding from the stripped bark like wounds. The air here felt thick and charged, like right before a earstorm. My skin prickled with electricity. That's when I made my mistake. I was examining one of the newly stripped trees, running my fingers over the rough edges where the bark had been torn away, trying to understand what kind of tool could make these marks. I pressed too hard against a loose piece of bark, and it broke off in my hand with a loud crack. The forest went completely silent. No birds, no insects. Even the wind stopped blowing. It was like someone had turned off all the sound in the world. Then came the answering call. That wind through leaves voice, but louder now and definitely angry. It echoed from all around me, from every direction at once. More voices joined it, creating a chorus of fury that seemed to shake the trees themselves. I ran. Forget everything I learned about staying calm in the wilderness. Forget my military training about never showing fear to the enemy. I crashed through the underbrush like a panicked deer, branches tearing at my clothes, roots trying to trip me with every step. Behind me, the forest came alive. Trees creaked and groaned without any wind to move them. Branches reached down to grab at me as I passed underneath. Roots erupted from the ground, forming barriers across the path. The very earth seemed to be working against me. I could hear them following. Not just footsteps now, but the sound of large bodies moving through the trees. Sometimes I caught glimpses of them keeping pace with me through the woods, their bark-covered forms blending perfectly with the forest until they moved. They were hurting me. Every time I tried to turn toward what I thought was the way back to my camp, fallen trees blocked the path or thick brambles grew across the trail. They forced me deeper into the woods, toward areas I'd never seen before. I stumbled into a clearing and stopped, gasping for breath. 5 of them stood waiting for me, up, close. They were even more impossible than they'd seemed from a distance. Each one was over 8 feet tall, their bodies covered in living bark that shifted and changed as I watched. Moss grew in their hair like a green crown. Their fingers ended in thick, woody claws, perfect for stripping bark. But their eyes were the worst part. Not the solid green I'd seen from far away, but deep and knowing, like they could see right through me to every mistake I'd ever made. The largest one stepped forward and spoke in that wind voice, but this time I could almost understand it. The words formed in my mind more than my ears. Tree killer, you damage the sacred groves. You carry the death tools of the destroyers. I wanted to explain that I was trying to protect the forest, that I was investigating the damage, not causing it. But when I opened my mouth, only a scared croak came out. The creature continued. For generations, your kind has cut and burned and poisoned. The forest grows sick. The trees cry out in pain. We are their immune system. We are their revenge. It gestured with one clawed hand at the damaged trees around us. But now I could see something I'd missed before. The trees weren't dying, they were changing. New growth was already sprouting from the stripped areas, but it was different, harder, darker, like the forest was growing armor. You will help us, the creature said, or you will feed the roots. That's when I understood. These weren't random tree vandals I'd been tracking. These were the forest's guardians, and they thought I was the enemy. The ground under my feet began to soften. Roots broke through the soil, reaching for my ankles like grasping fingers. I fell backward as the roots grabbed at me, landing hard on the forest floor. The 5 bark-covered giants circled closer, their wooden claws scraping against each other with sounds like breaking branches. "Wait!" I finally managed to shout. "I'm not here to hurt the trees. I'm trying to protect them." The largest creature tilted its head, studying me. When it spoke again, its voice was like wind whistling through a hollow log. "All humans lie. All humans destroy. We have watched for centuries as your kind strips the earth bare." "Look at my equipment," I said desperately, pointing to my ranger gear. "I don't carry saws or axes. I carry measuring tools, cameras, maps. I document damage. I don't cause it." Another creature, shorter but bulkier than the first, stepped forward. Thick moss covered its shoulders like a fur coat. "Show us," it demanded. With shaking hands, I pulled out my camera and flipped through the photos I'd taken over the past few days. Pictures of stripped bark, damaged trees, the strange footprints. "I'm investigating who's been hurting the forest," I explained. "Someone called in reports of illegal cutting." The creatures passed my camera between them, their wooden fingers surprisingly gentle with the delicate equipment. They seemed to understand what the photos showed, pointing at details and making those wind-voice sounds to each other. The largest one handed the camera back. "You track the true destroyers?" "Yes," I said, getting to my feet carefully. The roots had retreated back into the soil. "That's my job. I protect the forest from people who want to harm it." "Then you will see what we have seen." The creature pressed its palm against a large pine tree. The bark began to glow with a soft green light that spread up the trunk and into the branches. The light jumped from tree to tree throughout the grove, connecting them in a web of living energy. Suddenly, I could see through the trees' memories. Images flashed through my mind. Decades of forest history compressed into moments. I saw men with chainsaws cutting down ancient oaks, bulldozers pushing over entire groves to make room for parking lots, chemicals sprayed from trucks, leaving brown patches of dead vegetation in their wake. But I also saw the bark peeler's response. They would find the men responsible and strip them of their protective clothing, leaving them naked and lost in the deep woods. Not killing them. That would be too quick. Instead, they would mark them with symbols carved into their skin, warnings that would keep them away from the forest forever. The visions shifted to recent events. A group of poachers had been working the area, taking more than just trees. They were stripping valuable bark from rare medicinal plants, selling it to buyers in the city who didn't care where it came from. The bark peelers had been trying to heal the damage, but faster than they could fix it, the poachers kept coming back. "The destroyers have a camp," the creature explained. 3 miles north, hidden in the old logging road. They return each night to count their stolen goods. I understood now. The bark peelers weren't the criminals. They were trying to stop the real criminals. And I'd been tracking the wrong suspects. "Let me help," I said. "I have a radio backup coming. If we can catch these poachers with evidence—" "Your human laws are weak," another creature interrupted. "The destroyers pay money and return to their work. Only fear keeps them away permanently." That night they showed me their plan. We surrounded the poachers' hidden camp just as the 3 men returned from another day of stripping valuable bark from rare trees. Their truck was loaded with huge bundles of inner bark from wild cherry, oak, and birch, worth thousands of dollars to the right buyers. The bark peelers didn't attack right away. First, they let the forest itself do the work. Trees began to close in on the camp. Branches wove together overhead, cutting off escape routes. Roots burst from the ground, tangling the men's feet. The very earth tilted and shifted, making it impossible to run. When the men finally saw the bark peelers emerging from what they'd thought were just regular trees, their screams echoed through the entire forest. I watched from cover as the creatures systematically stripped the poachers' cloth away, leaving long scratches in their skin that would scar into permanent warnings. They destroyed the men's tools, their truck, their stolen goods. But they left the men alive, terrified, marked, but alive. "Tell others," the largest bark peeler commanded in a voice like grinding stone. "This forest is protected. Those who harm it will face the tree shepherd's justice." The three poachers stumbled away naked through the dark woods, following the only path the bark peelers left open, the trail back to town. I made my report the next morning, but not the one my supervisors expected. "Found the illegal operation," I radioed back to base. "3 poachers working the medicinal bark trade. They've abandoned the area. Looks like they got spooked by something and left all their equipment behind." It was technically true. I led a recovery team to the abandoned camp, and we confiscated thousands of dollars worth of stolen bark and damaged cutting tools. The case was officially closed as suspects fled jurisdiction. The 3 poachers were found the next day stumbling down Main Street in town wearing nothing but scratch marks and terrified expressions. They claimed they'd been attacked by tree demons and immediately left the county. Word spread fast among the illegal logging community. Grandfather Mountain was off limits. But my real report went to a different audience. That night, I returned to the sacred grove where the bark peelers waited. The largest one, who I'd started thinking of as the elder, listened as I described the official response. "The law keepers will not return?" it asked. "Not unless there are new complaints," I assured it. "And there won't be any new complaints if people stay away from the protected areas. You speak truth. We can sense deception in humans. You carry no lies." Over the following months, I found ways to help the bark peelers without breaking my oath as a ranger. When logging permits came up for areas near their sacred groves, I made sure the environmental impact studies found reasons to reject them. When hikers reported strange sounds or moving trees, I investigated personally and steered people away from the bark peelers' territory. In return, they shared their knowledge of the forest with me. I learned which plants could heal, which paths were safe during storms, which areas needed protection from human interference. My reports on forest health became the most accurate in the district. Other rangers started noticing my success rate. Poaching dropped to almost 0 in my sector. Illegal camping disappeared. Even the usual problems with rowdy tourists seemed to solve themselves. People who entered the deep woods with bad intentions found the forest itself turning against them. 6 months later, I received a commendation for my conservation work. At the ceremony, my supervisor mentioned that Grandfather Mountain was being considered for expanded protected status, thanks to my detailed reports on its unique ecosystem. I thought about the bark peelers when I accepted that award. Somewhere in the deep woods, they were still working, healing damaged trees, guarding the sacred groves, keeping the ancient balance between human needs and forest survival. The Cherokee were right about the tree killers' spirits. They just got one thing wrong. The bark peelers don't punish people who hurt the forest. They are the forest hurting back.